I've held back from telling this story to anyone outside of a few close friends for a long time now. It wasn't big in the news, but I think it should have been. Looking back now, I can see just how horrifying the whole thing really was. When I was 14, I was incredibly naive, desperate for attention, and living in a state of constant chaos. My home life was abusive. I wasn't allowed to hang out with friends except during school hours, so I was isolated. I didn't have the support system that most kids take for granted. Instead, I went looking for connection in the worst possible place, the internet. Like a lot of teens in the early 2010s, I found Omegle. At first, it felt exciting, chatting with strangers from all over the world. I had no idea then just how dangerous that place was. And that's where I met him. He said his name was Noble. He told me he was 20 years old, lived in Missouri, and it seemed like he zeroed in on me right away. He called me pretty, told me I was special, gave me the kind of attention that I had never gotten at home. And when you're a lonely 14-year-old girl, those words feel like love. It didn't matter that my mom, who I call my birth giver for reasons that I'm not going to get into here, tried to shut this down when she found out. She took my phone, computer, any devices I could to communicate with him, set up the barriers that she could. But I was stubborn. I thought Noble loved me, and no one was going to convince me otherwise. Over the next year, I was removed from my home multiple times. Sometimes I was placed with relatives. Other times I ended up in group homes. Social workers and case managers shuffled me around like I was a problem that they couldn't exactly solve. But through every move, Noble stayed a constant in my life. So long as I had a phone, he was there with me. Eventually, I learned the truth about Noble. He wasn't 20 like he said. He was 31, a grown man more than twice my age, but by that point, I was so far gone that I didn't care. I told myself it didn't matter. I told myself that he was the only one who loved me, and that's how deeply I had been groomed. Every time I was placed somewhere new, someone would eventually find out that I was in contact with this man. They'd take my phone, try to block him, remind me that what he was doing was dangerous. But it never stuck. The second I had access to my phone again, I went straight back to him. At one point during all of this, I was living with my biological father. He caught on to Noble too, and did what he could to stop it. It worked for a while. I was put on medication, I was in therapy, and I started to stabilize. But then we moved, and eventually I was pulled out of treatment. Without that structure, I started to unravel, and Noble was right there waiting. By the age of 15, I was in yet another group home. I'd only been there 3 weeks when I decided to take off. And of course, the first person that I contacted was Noble. He drove 16 hours straight from Missouri to New York to come pick me up. That alone should tell you the lengths that he was willing to go to get me. I had given some random woman at a gas station a sob story about why I was out there alone, and she allowed me to hide in her house while he made the trip. When he got there, I climbed right into his car without any hesitation. We started driving back to Missouri, but somewhere in Pennsylvania, I realized just how deep his lies went. I was playing on his phone when I noticed messages and Snapchats from other girls. Lots of them. When I confronted him about these, he admitted that he was doing the same thing with them that he'd been doing with me. Swapping photos, late night calls, that same "you're special" routine. I broke down crying. I begged him to either turn around and take me back, or drop me off on the side of the road and I'd find my own way back. But that's when he snapped. He pulled the car over and instantly turned violent. I'll spare you the details, but I think you can connect the dots. I was just this 100-pound, underfed teenager, and he was a grown man nearly twice my size. I never stood a chance. When I woke up, I was in a hotel room with him. I was on the bed. He was on top of me. That was the moment that I finally understood I had never been loved. I had only been targeted. The rest of that trip is still a blur in my memory. I learned quickly that if I wanted to survive this, I had to pretend that everything was fine. I had to play the role of a happy underage girlfriend, even while my entire life was spiraling. When we finally reached his apartment in Missouri, I saw my one chance to fight back. I asked for his phone, pretending that I wanted to play a game, and for whatever reason, this dumbass handed it over. I immediately messaged both my grandmother and my birth giver on Facebook, telling them that I loved them, and if they didn't hear from me, I'm in Missouri. I have no doubt that that message saved me. Maybe a couple of days later, Noble's door was kicked in by the FBI and Missouri State Police. They cuffed him on the spot and pulled me out of there. They took every phone, every computer, every hard drive in that apartment. Basically, every piece of technology. You'd think that would be the end of the nightmare for me, but in some ways, it wasn't. Instead of being treated like a victim of this, I was treated like some sort of accomplice. I was placed in juvenile detention, then transferred to a psychiatric ward, then back to juvie again. I was 15 years old. I'd been kidnapped, abused, and groomed. Yet the system treated me like a criminal. Eventually, I was flown back to New York and placed into residential care. That's where my life finally started to even out again. As for Noble, he was sentenced to 30 years in prison. 30 years for what he did to me and to several other young girls. Now, here's the part that made me want to share this. A few years back, basically out of nowhere, Noble found me again, from prison, on Instagram. He actually contacted me, sliding into DMs like nothing had changed. The moment I saw his face pop up, I laid into him. I told him that he was disgusting, that I wasn't this little girl anymore, and that he needed to leave me alone. I think he got the memo, but he never should have been able to reach out to me in the first place. I still keep tabs on his case as best as I can. At one point I noticed his sentence dropped from 30 years to 26. I figure maybe he's working time off or there was some sort of deal that he cut. I don't know, but it scares me, because if he could reach me once, what's stopping him from trying again and again? Looking back on this whole thing, it's clear now. Noble never loved me. He only preyed on me. He saw a vulnerable kid in and out of group homes bouncing from one unstable placement to another, and he exploited every weakness I had. I share this story now, not for sympathy, but as a warning. There are people like Noble everywhere, searching for kids who feel unloved, unwanted, or ignored. And those kids, like I once was, are often the easiest targets. If my story can make even one person think twice before trusting someone they meet online, then it's worth telling. Because no child, no person should ever go through what I went through. In the summer of 1997, I was about 4 years old. My family spent a weekend afternoon at a big water park a couple of towns over from where we lived. Thinking back about this place, it's the kind of spot that seemed magical to a kid, but it had to be chaotic to a parent. The main entrance opened up into a bustling food court filled with the smell of French fries, hot dogs, and sunscreen. There was a big map nearby showing off all the attractions in the park. To the left was an indoor arcade that had a couple of baby rides out front. Behind it was a massive wave pool that seemed to stretch on forever. And to the right was the kiddie section with splash pads and miniature slides. Beyond that were the lazy river and a bunch of taller water slides where my older brothers were already eager to go. Because they were older and wanted the thrill rides, my mom split from them and stayed with me in the kiddie park. I was the baby of the family, so while my brothers disappeared toward the slides, I happily played in ankle-deep water and made fast friends with the kids splashing around me. I remember my mom sitting nearby on one of those flimsy folding lounge chairs, her line of sight to me partially blocked by other little slides and a bunch of kids running back and forth. That's when a boy around my size approached me. He asked if I wanted to go to the wave pool. To me, the wave pool looked like the crown jewel of the entire park. You could hear the roar of the water and laughter even from the kiddie section, and I'd been eyeing it ever since we walked in. But I knew my mom's rules. She had told me in no uncertain terms, no wave pool without an adult. So I told the boy I couldn't go. But without missing a beat, he told me not to worry, that his dad was waiting for us, and he'd already talked to my mom about keeping an eye on us. I was 4 years old, trusting, and when he said the one thing I wanted to hear, that it was fine to go to the wave pool, I was eager to believe him. So I followed. My mom probably didn't notice right away. From where she was, I don't think she could easily see past all the kids running around in the kiddie area. One moment I was splashing at the bottom of a slide, and the next I was walking away hand in hand with another kid. When we reached the wave pool, sure enough, there was a man waiting for us. The guy didn't hesitate either. He immediately took my hand, replacing the little boy's, and guided me straight into the water. I can still remember that feeling, my tiny hand in his much larger one, being led like it was the most natural thing in the world. We weren't in the water long, maybe 2 minutes? Just enough time for me to think I was finally getting my wish, but then without any explanation, he yoinked me up out of the pool and started walking me towards the front of the park. At 4 years old, I didn't think to question it. I assumed maybe we were going to get food, since that's where the food court was. But as we got closer to the gates, a lifeguard suddenly stepped into our path. She bent down and asked me directly, "Is your name?" before repeating my name. Without thinking, I said yes, and for whatever reason, immediately burst into tears. I think that I was convinced I was in trouble. Before I could process what was happening, she scooped me out of the man's arms. And just like that, I saw my mom running towards me, sobbing, frantic, and completely out of breath. Years later, when I was much better equipped to understand what had happened, my mom filled in the blanks for me. She told me that she noticed I was gone within minutes. She ran to the nearest lifeguard, describing me down to the ribbons in my hair. Yellow bathing suit, pink flowers, 2 yellow bows. She begged them to shut the park gates before anyone could leave. That lifeguard who stopped me at the entrance, she was waiting specifically for that description. And because my mom had been so accurate, that lifeguard didn't miss. Now, here's the part that still scares me to no end. When I asked my mom later about the boy who had lured me to the wave pool, she told me there was no boy. None of the staff, no other witnesses remembered seeing another child. It had only been that man. Which means the kid I thought I followed may have never existed. Whether it was my memory trying to make sense of it all, or whether he really had used some kind of trick to approach me, my mom insists that it was just one creepy guy. She said after the lifeguard intervened, the man willingly dropped me, beelined for the entrance, and sprinted off to his car. I guess security had tried to follow him, but they had lost track once they got into the mess of cars in the lot. To this day, I still don't know what his plan was. Was he going to take me out of the park and vanish completely? Or was he just taking me to the parking lot to do other unimaginable things to me? The thought of how close I came to never making it back to my mom makes me sick even now as an adult. Because when you're little, you don't see the world as evil as you do as when you're older. You think you're safe in public. You think everyone around you is just there for the same fun that you're having. But predators don't always look like monsters. I was unbelievably lucky that day. And it left me with a lingering lesson that I've carried into adulthood. Children don't recognize danger the way that some adults do. A smile and a promise of something exciting is all it takes for some kids to follow a stranger without any hesitation. And without vigilant adults around, those stories could end very differently. So even though this happened decades ago, I still think about it regularly. About that yellow bathing suit, about that lifeguard saying my name, and about how easily my story could have ended before it ever really began. Let me preface this story by saying in my early 20s, I was a complete disaster. and admittedly made a lot of poor choices. Luckily, I survived them all, and now I have a treasure trove of interesting stories to tell. When I was 21, I found myself without a place to live. On the first night, I went to a bar where a friend was performing stand-up comedy. Now, I had started drinking at maybe 2 or 3 p.m. that day, so I was pretty gone by the time Creepy Man enters the picture. Creepy Man was a friend of the guy performing stand-up. The four of us hang out at the bar until closing. I happen to mention offhandedly to Creepy Man that I don't have a place to stay, and he invites us all over to spend the night. Creepy Guy was a decade plus older than the rest of us, and he was breaking out into shamanic chants all night long. But hey, a bed is a bed, right? We arrive at his place in the wee hours of the morning, smoke a little weed and drink for a while, and then my friend dips out for the evening. Me and the other guy continue to hang out with Creepy Guy until I pass out on the couch. I wake up in the morning and I'm alone. Creepy Guy gets up soon after, and funnily enough, brings out some women's clothes in my size for me to change into. I think back now and wonder what he was doing with the women's clothes, but at the time, all I did was thank him before haphazardly picking out an outfit. Then we talk more about my situation, and he offers for me to stay there as long as I need. He tells me a story about losing his wife and kids, while also telling me that I remind him of his daughter. We end up spending the day together. It was odd to say the least. We met up with a schizophrenic guy friend of his who collected rocks. We split a meal at BK. Then we went back to his house. He wanted some help doing the dishes, so of course I offered to help. At this point, he lets me know that the water is shut off, so he has to go get water out of his neighbor's spigot. I start to get a little suspicious, but that's when I begin to connect the dots, and it dawns on me that this man is homeless, and he's squatting in this house. It's getting late now, and I'm a good hour outside of the city, so I decide my best bet is to spend the night and peace out early in the morning. He says that I can stay in the spare bedroom, and he lets me wash up with a bucket of water before bed. I'm in the bathroom getting ready, and I hear him pacing in the hallway, talking to himself, saying something to the effect of, "I'm not going to do it. Don't get any ideas." At this point, I'm thoroughly creeped out, and my heart is just about pounding outside of my chest. I leave the bathroom expecting him to be standing there with a knife, but he's not. He tells me I'm safe and how he's not going to try anything with me because of how much I remind him of his daughter. I've got chills now and a pit in my stomach, but all I can muster is a half-hearted smile and try to get through this interaction. He then shows me to the bedroom. As we enter it, he says something like, "Don't be scared of the blood. It's just from homeless men that got into a fight." My heart drops, but I politely say goodnight and shut the door, locking it behind him. I can't remember now if it was a bunk bed or not, but either way, I remember staring up at a large bloodstain above where the bed was. At this point, I'm 90% sure that I'm going to be murdered, and I'm trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. Creepy Guy is still outside in the hallway, pacing around and talking to himself. I decide that I have to wait it out until morning, when the buses are running again. So I open the window, take off the screen part. I turn off the lights. I stay fully dressed with my shoes on and keep my bag right next to me in bed. I lay there all night, prepared to fight and escape at any given moment. Luckily, dawn breaks and I'm still alive, so I sneak out of the house and catch a bus back to town. This guy texts me throughout the day, asking when I'm coming back, and I rightfully ghost him. Haven't seen him since, but occasionally I wonder what was going on with that dude, and if I was in as much danger as I feel like I was in hindsight. When I graduated college, I was about 24 years old, and I really wanted to get out on my own and try living alone. Luckily for me, my grandma had asked to be moved into an assisted living center about a year prior. I'd asked my parents if I could live in her house. They talked it over with my grandma, and she agreed that it would be nice to have someone living there after a year of it sitting empty. This was in a kind of up-and-coming area, although it still had its rough spots. I was so excited about it, until I got there to do a walkthrough to see how I was going to set up my things. The house was a shotgun-style home with a cellar that could only be accessed from the outside. While I was walking through the house, I swore I was hearing noises. I finally realized that they were coming from the basement. I called the police, and they came out and escorted 6 people from the cellar. They were squatters that had been living there. After they left, I went down there to find all kinds of stuff, save for the drugs and other illegal stuff that the cops took with them. It looked like someone had spray painted the walls all over. It was just a concrete cellar where the water heater and HVAC was, so I wouldn't have really cared, except it seemed to be kind of satanic. I don't know anything about that stuff, but there was a couple of pentagrams and a chalk circle on the floor. Cops didn't really have anything to say about it. They didn't know either. I poured some water on the floor to wash away the circle, but the walls, I couldn't do much about, so I just left them as they were. Fast forward a few months of me living there, I had just about forgotten all about this. I'd started dating my future wife, and she was over a lot. We were getting ready for bed one night. I was in the bathroom brushing my teeth. That's when I heard a knock come from the back door. At first, I thought it was strange, although with the running water and the old house itself, maybe I could have imagined it. But the knock came again. It was 1 a.m. and this was my back door. Someone had to have come into my backyard by opening the fence gate. I promptly grabbed my gun and went to the door, keeping my firearm out of view. I look through the window and I see some guy standing on the porch. I opened the interior wooden door, but kept the outside storm door shut and locked. I asked what he was here for since it was so late. All he said was,
"Is Christina here?"
I told him he must have the wrong house, and all he said was,
"Oh, so do you want me to leave?"
I told him that would be a good choice, and an even better one if he didn't come back. He just stood there staring at me. I was getting nervous at this point, so with nothing else left to say, I shut the door. He walked down the steps and just stood in my backyard, staring up at the house for about 15 minutes. Then he walked his way over to the cellar doors and tried to open them. I had them padlocked months ago, and he eventually gave up. I opened up my back window and I told him that he'd best get out of here before the cops show up, or he gets shot, or both. Again, without saying a word, he just stared, but he finally did leave. I'll admit, I didn't sleep much that night. Again, a couple of months later, I'm in one part of the house and my girlfriend's in another, when I hear her yell my name. She tells me that the guy is back. He's just standing in the backyard staring up at the house. This time, it was broad daylight. I wasn't going to confront him this time. I decided to call the cops. He decided to try the cellar doors again, but ultimately left before the police showed up. The next day, I went down to the cellar to see if maybe there had been something left behind that he was trying to get, but I found nothing. It's just a damp, disgusting cellar with a dirt floor. I have zero idea why he wanted in there so badly. I highly doubt the satanic stuff had anything to do with it. It just made this whole thing feel even creepier. I unfortunately had to move out sometime later as I could no longer afford to live there. Never saw the guy again. Although I will admit, anytime my motion lights flick on in the middle of the night, I get a brief glimpse of this man in my memory. When I was a kid, my 2 younger siblings and I stayed the weekend at our grandmother's house while our parents were out of town. My grandma's long-term boyfriend, let's call him Banks, had moved in with her and would be staying the weekend with us as well. The moment I met this guy, he immediately gave me the creeps. I don't remember much from our first night there, so I assume nothing out of the ordinary happened. That quickly changed the next morning, though. My grandma announced she'd be leaving us at home with Banks for a bit so she could pick up some groceries. As grandma left, my brother, sister, and I sat on the living room couch watching TV. Shortly thereafter, I heard Banks come out from his bedroom down the hall. I listened closely to Banks' footsteps as he approached and noticed that he was more so slowly creeping down the hallway as opposed to walking. I fixated on the doorway where he'd inevitably appear, and when he did, he was crouched down, eyes wide and grinning with his hands positioned as if he was about to pounce towards us. He began running towards the couch and yelling, "I'm the tickle monster," then jumped on top of my younger sister, aggressively tickling her while kneeling over her on the couch. For reference, Banks is over 6 feet tall. He's muscular for an old guy, and my sister was under the age of 10 at that point. My sister repeatedly asked Banks to stop, exclaiming, "I don't like it. Stop that." My sister eventually let out a high-pitched scream and began to hysterically cry. At this point, as her older brother, I intervened. It sounded like Banks was hurting her, and I didn't like that he was continuing to tickle her while she screamed and cried for him to stop. I tried inserting myself between my sister and Banks and told him more firmly to stop. He wouldn't remove his hands from my sister, though. That's when I began slapping Banks's arms, telling him to let go of her. And once he released his grip, I screamed, "Run," to both of my siblings. The only thing I remember feeling or thinking in this moment was, "Get the f*** away from this man right now." I ran out of the living room, down the hallway, and into the first bedroom. My sister followed behind me, then my brother. As I was closing the bedroom door, Banks caught up to us and shoved himself against the door to prevent me from locking it. Miraculously, I was able to get it locked before he could overpower me. Once my siblings and I were locked in the bedroom, Banks continued to bang on the door while he repeatedly yelled, "I'm the tickle monster. Let me in now." Both my siblings are hysterically crying at this point, and I'm overcome with the fear of what Banks will do if he manages to gain access to the bedroom, although for my siblings, I try not to show it. There was no landline in this room, and I didn't have a cell phone, but that didn't mean Banks knew that. I yelled back at him, "If you don't stop, I'm going to call the police." Banks backed off, and I heard his footsteps retreat into his bedroom down the hall before he closed the door. My brother, sister, and I stayed in the bedroom with the door locked until my grandma got back. Banks remained in his bedroom for the rest of the night. The following morning, Banks left the house, and my grandma said he'd be gone for the day working. That afternoon, my grandma fell asleep on the living room couch, and for whatever reason, I went into what appeared to be Banks's nightstand, and I found his personal journal. For the most part, it was filled with nonsense and very detailed, drawn depictions of sex. Some of the drawings had a bit of a satanic undertone, but at the time, I was too young to recognize or even really understand what it was I was looking at. I began quickly flipping through it, and I landed on a page with big, bold black and red capital letters. It said, "If you die a virgin, do you go to hell?" Below it was a drawing of a prepubescent nude girl. There were two versions of the girl standing side by side, one where she appears happy and smiley, and the other where her face is more distorted and confused looking. Typing this out and re-envisioning it, it makes me feel disgusting. I don't know how to emphasize just how disturbing it was to see. After seeing these pictures, I remember going numb and just dropping the journal where I stood. I ran to the living room and demanded my grandma to call my parents so we could go home immediately. As a kid, I wasn't exactly sure of how to lay out all the details of what had happened, between the experience with Banks and what I just saw in his journal. So I'm sure to my grandma, it kind of came out of left field that I was demanding to go home. I regret to this day that I didn't lay things out as best as I could, though. The rest of the day before my parents got there to pick us up, it was kind of a blur to me. But I remember as we were walking out, seeing bruises on my sister's arms. I quietly asked her if those were from Banks tickling her. She didn't respond. She just pulled her shirt sleeves down further so that nobody else could see them. My brother, sister, and I don't talk about this outing very much. I think it's something that still has a lot of unpacking to be done. And while I couldn't explain to an adult why we wanted to come home so badly, I think my parents picked up on what we were putting down. They never sent us back to our grandma's, so long as Banks was still there. I, a 25-year-old female, had an experience about 4 days ago that I just haven't been able to shake. I was in the middle of dog/house sitting for my boyfriend while he was away on a backpacking trip. My boyfriend's home is in a semi-remote area at the bottom of a hill at the back of a few acres of property. He's right next to the highway, which has opposite to us a small rural neighborhood. It's both very sketchy and very safe, meaning that the community is close, but people frequently keep to themselves. And there are lots of abandoned, dilapidated homes right next to very well-kept ones. A pretty typical countryside neighborhood, if you ask me. So I really didn't feel unsafe to agree to watch my boyfriend's property and his dog Hennessy. Hennessy is a 115-pound jet black American Bulldog / English Lab mix. He's basically all muscle, and ever since my boyfriend and I began dating, he's become very protective over me and my own dog, Lottie. Lottie is a 57-pound poodle mix. I'm a dog groomer, so she's usually done up in pretty silly haircuts with bows and everything. All of this is to say that one of my dogs is very intimidating, and the other is far from it. Because of his strength, however, I can't walk Hennessy and Lottie at the same time on my own. So I usually walk Lottie alone and then go back and get Hennessy to walk with him alone. We do about 30 minutes of walking each, and I like to take Hennessy after Lottie at night because I feel safer with him as it gets later. This is important because this happened to be the case 4 nights ago. I was about 75% of the way through my walk with Lottie when I got this really strange feeling. The kind that comes when you're being watched. I felt the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, and I looked around to see that about 30 feet or so back, there was this tall man in a hoodie standing next to an older, run-down home. I instantly thought the hoodie was weird. I live in inland Northern California, and it's early August. It doesn't get colder than 87 degrees in the evening, especially when the sun was still setting like it was at this time. I forced myself to brush it off though, as I tend to be fairly paranoid due to my years of reading Let's Not Meet stories and taking in a whole lot of true crime content. As I kept walking, the sun kept setting and the streets began to slowly get darker. I would glance back from time to time and notice that the man was keeping pace with me, not breaking that odd 30-foot distance though. If I turned a corner, so did he. If I sped up, he did as well. Finally, we reached the highway, and I crossed right before a car came speeding past, hoping that if the guy was actually following me, that this would put some distance between him and myself, which it did. But that didn't stop him from continuing to follow me. I walked as fast as I could to the house, not wanting to turn around, but now being able to hear his footsteps on the gravel behind me. At this point, Lottie had noticed him too, and had started to bark, growl, and whine. I forced her to keep moving though, and thankfully, we made it back inside the house, slamming and locking the door shut, hoping that would be the end of it. But moments after I got the door locked, I'm still pressed with my back up against it, and I feel someone trying to open it. The dogs heard this too and started barking because they always do when someone's at the door. There's no peephole on the front door, but I can talk to whoever's on the other side. It's a pretty thin door actually. So I yelled out and asked who was there. Through the breaks in the barking, I could hear a man's voice. "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" For some reason, the way he said this was so creepy. It was like there was nothing behind it, kind of like he'd rehearsed the line or decided to say it beforehand. I yelled back no and asked him to please go away. He paused for another second, and then again I heard, "I love your dog. Can I meet her?" He starts trying the door handle again, this time pushing up against it. By this point, Hennessy can tell something is wrong, and so can Lottie. The hair on the back of Hennessy's neck is standing up, and he's mashing his teeth while growling. At that moment, I don't know what possessed me, but I threw Lottie into the bathroom behind me, grabbed Hennessy by the collar, keeping him close to the door with me. He's still barking and going absolutely crazy. I hear the man repeat that he wants to meet my dog one more time, and I yell out, "Leave." He paused, and then, with all of his weight, slammed right into the door. I saw the door shake on its hinges, but after that instant, it was quiet for a split second. I took that moment to unlock the door and open it just wide enough that Hennessy could get about halfway out. He's going bonkers at this point, My hand is starting to hurt from holding him back. I can hear his teeth clacking as he ferociously chomps towards the man. Well, it's clear that this dude was not expecting Hennessy. He stumbled backward, almost falling over and cursing as he scrambled to stay off the ground. He didn't even look at me, and instead booked it up the hill as fast as he could and out of sight. I managed to yank Hennessy back in, and I called the cops to tell them what had happened. I never got a good look at the guy, and they basically told me there wasn't really anything they could do. But they did take my statement and told me they'd contact me if anything ever came of it. I just want to say that I'm so thankful for Hennessy. After all of this, I snuggled up with him and Lottie that night and cried because it had all hit me of just how terrifying that was, plus the adrenaline dump. I went out the next day and bought Henny the biggest treat that I could find at a pet store because he'd clearly earned it. I also got Lottie a little something too. I don't know why this creep didn't get the hint when I had 2 dogs barking inside, but my assumption is that he didn't really realize he was hearing 2 sets of barks. Or he assumed that if I had 2 dogs, they were both like my fluffy poodle. That is to say, he clearly wasn't afraid. That is, until the door opened. I'm so thankful the guy didn't have a weapon, and looking back now, I probably should have just called the cops and kept my door closed. But I hope that maybe because he saw Hennessy, he'll know not to come back and mess with us. Because if he does, this big sweet boy is going to rip his arm off. Before I launch into my story, I just want to say I'm aware of how dumb it is to do stuff like this, and I probably won't be doing this for a long time after what happened a few months back. Anyway, I just really wanted to share this because I don't know who else to tell. About 6 months ago, I had the scariest experience of my life. For background, I'm a dumb teenage boy who sneaks out every now and then just to walk around at night. I find something very peaceful about walking around after dark, but my parents have never let me stay out past sunset. So for about a year, whenever school gets hard or just life in general gets stressful, I sneak out and walk around for about an hour or 2. Anyway, the night that I'm going to reference began with me deciding to go for another 2 a.m. ritual walk. I grabbed a sweatshirt, got my shoes on once I was outside my back door, and hopped the backyard fence to freedom. After I was safely away from my neighborhood, I took one of my usual routes, which is cutting through another neighborhood and walking onto a winding road, where I then walked down the middle of it and head towards a circle of shops and fast food restaurants. I was probably there for a solid chunk of time just walking in the loop and ending up sitting on a bench. At some point, I picked up a plastic spoon off the ground and started to grind it against the pavement. This was out of sheer boredom until the spoon part was half gone. After killing a little bit more time, I was chilling there for a while before I decided to walk around a tiny bit more, and I eventually ended up at a park like 10 minutes away from my neighborhood. This is a spot where I usually finish off my night by just staring off into the sky. The park itself gives me the chills sometimes at night because there's a huge ring of trees surrounding all sides of you, and anyone could be watching you from the woods. This is the point where it starts to get real. I'm laying on one of those table-bench combos while I'm staring up into existence feeling like a philosopher when I hear an old man whistle. I remember shooting straight up because I had never had any other human interaction while on these walks. And that's when I see an old man dimly illuminated by a streetlight by the entrance of the park. Now, I had seen this guy before. He's this tall, skinny white guy that walks around our town all day, and I would honestly think he was homeless if he wasn't wearing a different fancy button-up shirt and clean cargo pants every day. Me and my mom have actually talked about him, and we think he's mentally disabled and likely lives with a caretaker. I had a singular interaction with him one time. About a year ago, I was walking home in broad daylight when I passed the man, who was at that time sitting on a bench. Dude just looks up at me and says, "Jesus loves you," with this weird little smirk on his face. I responded with an awkward, "I know," even though I'm an atheist, because what else do you really say in that situation? Anyway, back to the park at night. I just stare at this guy across the empty parking lot, likely way longer than I should have because he was already creeping me the hell out. I imagine we were locked in the staring contest for a long time before he slowly starts making his way towards me. And at this moment, I'm frozen in fear because why the f is this old geezer out with me at like 3 a.m. in an empty park? I'm standing up now when he gets close to me and he gives me this cheeky grin, like he knows something I don't yet. And I'm still just gawking at him like a fucking buffoon. Have you ever scoffed at a book or movie when the main character is frozen in fear? I know I have, and I never will again because I'm more frozen than I've ever been in my life at this moment. At some point, after maybe 10 or 15 seconds of awkward standing, he just kind of half pats and half grabs my shoulder before reaching into his pocket to pull out a plastic spoon. Yeah, that same plastic spoon that I was holding about an hour ago at the shop plaza. He tucks it into my front sweatshirt pocket, and I guess something about that act makes my mind snap out of frozen because I book it to the public restroom before locking the door behind me. I'm now in this dimly lit bathroom in the middle of the night, and I'm guessing at this time that it was likely past 3. I assumed that maybe he would leave once he saw me in my state of panic, but honestly, I don't think he ever left. I ended up looking closer at the plastic spoon, and it was altered, even beyond my grinding. Have you ever seen that viral AI-generated image where it looks completely normal at a glance, but you can't identify a single thing? If not, just search up, name one thing in this image. Now, imagine that, except a word carved onto a plastic spoon that you can't read, or even identify any of the characters. I think I sat in that locked bathroom for over half an hour, just contemplating every single decision I've made in my life that led me to this exact nightmare moment. To be clear, I had no phone or any way of contacting someone because my parents installed Life 360 on my phone, and they can see my location whenever they want. I also had no watch or access to the outside to tell the time. I ended up gaining the courage to unlock the door and just absolutely rocket myself towards the exit of the park. Before I turned the corner, I looked back for a split second and saw a figure sitting on the bench that was right next to the bathroom. Apparently, this old man had waited outside for an hour just to see me one more time. I'm being completely honest when I say I held a full sprint until I got back to my neighborhood, where I finally caught my breath behind a bush and then snuck back into my house. I haven't gone out at night since this experience, and I don't know if I'll ever sneak out again. This has seemingly scared me straight. I still have the spoon buried somewhere in my wardrobe, but I haven't looked at it in months. Sometimes I think about how long he was following me for, and if this itself was an isolated incident, or if he had been stalking me on other late night trips as well. I would love to hear your guys' opinion on the matter, unless you're here to lecture me about my actions because, trust me, I've already learned. I won't be doing this again. My mom still lives in the house that I was born and raised in, which is also where I had my very own creepy encounter. I'm 39 now, and the event I'll be describing occurred when I was 26. I visit my mom at her house often to check in and visit. On Sundays, we cook or bake and chat. On one particular Sunday, my mom mentioned she had borrowed a pan from her next door neighbor, who I'll be referring to as Nora. Nora had been my mom's next-door neighbor for as long as I'd been alive. Nora lived with her husband in that home up until they got divorced around the year 2000. My mom was busy trying to prepare a meal, so I offered to take the pan back to Nora. As I approached Nora's home, I noticed her car in the driveway. The back passenger tire was flat, and the inside of the car was a complete disaster. Since her divorce, Nora had become more reclusive, and I had not actually seen her in about a year, though my mom spoke about her interactions with her from time to time. I noticed the front window shades of the house were closed as I knocked on her door. I waited a reasonable amount of time before knocking again and ringing the doorbell this time, after getting no answer the first time. Following the doorbell ring, I heard something faint come from inside of the house. It sounded like a dog whining, then some shuffling, but it sounded far off. I listened for a little while and then knocked again, this time also calling out, "Nora, I brought your pan back." I thought maybe Nora wasn't feeling up to talking with anyone, but I also had this really weird feeling as I stood out on her porch. I kept thinking I heard shuffling inside, and had this weird sense that someone was right on the other side of that door. Getting a little uneasy, I knocked one more time and called out, but nothing. Unsure of what to do, I left the pan on Nora's doorstep, and I walked back to my mom's house. Once back inside, I described what happened to my mom and the weird feeling that I got, but my mother didn't seem particularly concerned and said that Nora would often stay inside her house without talking to anyone for weeks at a time. About 3 hours later, after having finished cooking, my mom and I were in her front yard looking at her garden. She was fussing around picking at weeds when I heard Nora's garage door open. There was a pretty large tree between my mom's and Nora's property, so I couldn't really get a good view of the door opening. But a few moments later, I saw a dark blue SUV backing out of her driveway and turning in a way that meant it would be driving past my mom's house. I never knew Nora to have an SUV, so I couldn't help but look as the car started driving past my mom's house. As it did, I saw that the driver's side window was rolled down, and a 30-ish-year-old male was driving. As he drove past, the man stared absolute daggers at my mom and myself. I asked my mom if she knew who that was. She told me that she didn't know his name, but that he had been staying with Nora for a couple of weeks now, and that he was kind of weird. She didn't see him glaring because she was messing around with the weeds, but again, I had that unsettled feeling settle down over me, although I just figured that Nora wasn't feeling like opening the door that day. Fast forward about 2 weeks, and I got a call from my mom while I was at work one afternoon. She left a voicemail, and when I heard the message, my stomach nearly fell out of my backside. Her voice was kind of shaky, and she told me that Nora had been reported as a missing person by some out-of-state family. I found out later that local police had enough information to force entry into her home. Inside, they found evidence to suggest someone had been gravely injured there. Testing would later reveal that blood found in the home belonged to Nora, and according to police, there was a lot of it. Also missing from the house was Nora's golden retriever Bo. Through various interviews and bank statements, the police investigation uncovered that the man who I'd seen leaving her house that day had spent tens of thousands of dollars from her savings account. Going further down the line here, the guy had allegedly admitted to his wife that he had murdered Nora and hid her body. He was convicted of this, and part of his plea deal stated that he had to reveal where he buried her, though he still hasn't to this day. Undoubtedly, the worst part for Nora's family is that this guy was supposed to be in prison when he took her life. He'd somehow been mistakenly released early on drug trafficking and possession charges. I sincerely feel like that creepy was watching me through Nora's peephole as I knocked on her door that day. I'll never know if she was already gone at that point, but I swear I heard her dog whining inside that day too. It still creeps me out to no end when I think of that day, and as I wonder what he was thinking when he drove past us in my mom's garden. When I was growing up, my mom sometimes had to bring me along to her work. She was a single parent and couldn't always find a babysitter, so I'd tag along and hang out around the store. I didn't mind it, and it was actually kind of fun. I got used to wandering the aisles, poking around behind the registers, and occasionally helping the employees with small things. It made me feel grown up, like I had a little role in this place. The store itself wasn't anything fancy. It was a mid-sized grocery store, only in one of the shadier parts of our town. It was the kind of place where everyone kind of knew not to hang around outside too long after dark. The building was worn, the linoleum floors scuffed from years of use, and the flickering fluorescent lights gave everything this slightly tired, dull glow. The people who came in were a mix of families, workers stopping by after shifts, and the occasional person down on their luck. Because of where it was located, I grew up seeing a lot of transients and homeless people. Some folks might think that's a bad thing, but honestly, I think it was good for me. It taught me pretty early on that most homeless people weren't scary. They were just regular people who had hit hard times. One of the regulars was Randy, a scruffy older guy with a gray beard who everyone at the store knew. He wasn't a problem. He'd sit outside on rainy days, leaning against the wall, and the employees usually let him stay out of kindness. To me, he was just part of the scenery. I also developed a kind of sixth sense from being there so often. My mom had drilled safety into me from a very young age. A lot of stranger danger, who not to trust, and what not to do. She'd lived through a few robberies while working, and while I was never there for those, I'd still overhear the things that she would say when she'd come home. So even as a kid, I could sometimes tell when something just didn't feel right. Well, one rainy afternoon, my mom had to run into work to grab some check stubs. She didn't want to leave me home alone, so I tagged along with her. As we were walking in, I saw Randy sitting outside under the overhang, bundled in an oversized coat. He nodded at us as we walked by, and there was nothing unusual there. Inside, the store was practically empty, though. The rain had clearly kept customers away, and only one register was even open. My mom told me to wait near the line of registers while she handled her paperwork. I gravitated towards one of the broken registers near the exit and started pressing on the dead buttons, pretending that I was the boss running the place. That was usually my favorite game. After a few minutes of this, I felt a tug on the back of my shirt. At first, I thought it was my mom coming to get me. But when I spun around, it wasn't her. Standing right behind me was a couple that I'd never seen before. As a kid, the first thing that I noticed was that they were old. But now in my adulthood, I realized that they were probably no older than their late 40s, or maybe early 50s. But they had these deep lines etched into their faces. That's what made me think that in the first place. The man was tall and wiry, his skin weathered like leather. He smiled at me in a way that I'm sure was supposed to look friendly, but instead it just made my stomach twist. The woman stood just behind him, her hair pulled back tightly. She never looked at me. Instead, her eyes darted around the store nervously. "Hey there," the man said, crouching down slightly to meet my eyes. "We were wondering if you'd like to buy a puppy. We've got a few in our car. We can take you to see them if you want." I was in shock. This is what my mom had warned me about countless times before. About people who use tricks that lure kids away. Candy, puppies, toys. If a stranger offered it, the answer was always no. Every nerve in my body screamed danger. I stammered something about needing to ask my mom, trying to edge around them to get to the office that I knew my mom was in. That's when the man's hand shot out and clamped down on my arm. The grip was like iron compared to my scrawny little kid strength. He started yanking me towards the exit, his fingers digging into my skin, and that's when panic started surging through me. I twisted and grabbed the edge of the broken register with both hands, holding on with everything I had. My feet skidded against the floor as he tried to drag me, and I was preparing to unleash the loudest scream that my lungs would allow. The man's face changed at this point. His fake smile twisted into something angrier, like he hadn't expected this type of fight. I could feel him prying at my fingers one by one, and for me, this felt like I was fighting a bear. I was just about to lose my grip when another voice cut through the chaos. "Is everything okay here?" I looked up, and there was Randy. He had wandered inside, probably to escape the rain for a bit, and was now standing between us and the exit, watching with narrowed eyes. The man froze up mid-tug, obviously caught off guard. Before he could answer, the woman stepped in, her voice high and rushed. "Oh, yeah, everything's fine. He's our son. Come on, Greg." My heart nearly exploded in my chest. "That's not my name," I screamed, thrashing in the man's grip. This is when my mom appeared, storming down the aisle with a look on her face that I'll never forget. She zeroed in on the man's hand still wrapped around my arm, and she lunged at him. She said in a tone that could have cut glass, "Why are you holding my son?" For a split second, the couple froze again, like they were trying to come up with the right story. Then the woman forced out a nervous laugh and said, "Oh my God, I'm so sorry. I thought he was our son. We'd better go find ours." Without waiting for a reply, she grabbed the man's sleeve, and they rushed out the door, brushing right past Randy as they went. The second they were gone, I burst into tears. My mom pulled me into a hug, still glaring at the doors like she expected them to come back. Randy stood there for another moment, then nodded to my mom, as if to say he had our backs, and then shuffled right back outside. When we finally calmed down enough to leave, I told my mom everything. These people offering puppies, the way the man had grabbed me, the way the woman lied about me being her kid. She just listened silently, her jaw clenched tighter with every word I said, though. On our way out, she thanked Randy over and over again before we left. After this experience, things changed. My mom never let me wander near the registers alone again, and she held my hand every time we walked into that store, no matter how old I got. If I was with her for a shift, no more walking up and down the aisles. I was relegated to the back office. That night when I went to bed, I remember staring at the ceiling and thinking about the way the man's hand had clamped down on my arm. How the woman had brazenly called me by the wrong name. I didn't have words for it then, but I knew deep down that something terrible had almost happened. And even as I got older, that memory never felt like something that faded. It's always kind of just sat there. A quiet reminder of the day that two strangers almost walked me out of my life. So, a little backstory here. I was an erotic dancer for 6 years. I've worked in many cities and many clubs. At the time of this story, I wasn't exactly a rookie. I was well versed in the industry. And at the time that this took place, I was 21, maybe 22, living in Texas and working at one of the upscale clubs in my area. I never imagined something like this would happen in this place, but apparently, I was wrong. I started my shift at about 6 p.m. I liked to get there early, meet with some of my regulars before the crowds came in. It was like 8:30, maybe 9 o'clock, and this really good-looking guy came in with some friends. They were all older, like 40, 45. I grabbed some of my hustle friends, and we went and sat with them. It wasn't hard to convince these guys into a VIP room with bottle service. But this is the point where things get kind of weird. The guy that I was talking to wanted a separate room for just us. I thought maybe because his friends seemed rowdy and wanting to party a little too hard, he wanted to have a more relaxed area. I wasn't complaining because that meant I wouldn't have to share my cut of the room. So stupid me saw dollar signs and just rolled with it. We get 2 bottles of Dom Perignon, some mixed drinks, and shots. Now, a lot of the guys that come into strip clubs really want to let loose, and they bring drugs with them as well. These guys had just about everything in that regard. I was definitely a party girl at the time too, so yeah, I partook in some of these favors, but I also wasn't stupid enough to overdo anything. So now we were all hanging out in one room together. I took a little hit of coke on the back of my hand and continued drinking. After we were all hyped up and ready to party, my guy pulled me into the other room. This guy was like 6'4", obviously worked out a lot and was attractive. I, on the other hand, without my heels, was 5'6" and maybe 120 pounds. I sat down in his lap. I started talking to him and laying down my moves to get him to empty his wallet, basically. We were having a really good conversation, and my bouncers were really good about checking up on the girls in the rooms because they're pretty secluded on the second floor. After about 20 minutes of talking, and without any warning, something snapped, and all of a sudden this guy puts his hands around my neck. He lifted me up off the ground and slammed me against the back of the couch. In this room, the couch backs were tall and padded, so it wouldn't have been heard on the other side. Plus, all the music, of course. In addition to being stuck in his grasp, I was frozen in fear. After almost 3 years of dancing, I had never been in a situation like this. He started calling me names. He spat in my face, and his grip on my neck would get tighter when he would feel me take a deep breath like I was going to scream. Luckily for me, there were also VIP rooms across the large overlook, and one of my bouncers noticed me kicking and flailing. The lights were starting to go out, and I felt my eyes flutter, but I faintly remember all of the bouncers rushing into this room. They had to pry me out of his hands. when I was finally back sitting on the couch, they had him on the floor outside the room, and his buddies acted like they didn't even know the guy. My manager grabbed me and carried me like a baby to the dressing room, asked if I needed any medical. I said no, I was just really shaken up. This guy's buddies talked to my manager and gave me guilt money for that happening. Apparently, he was going through a divorce and snapped on me instead of his ex. To the guy at the club from years back, I just want to remind you that strippers are people too. It's not my fault you were about to lose your house or get put onto child support. And based on your own actions, I'm pretty sure you only have yourself to blame for that. And to be honest, I love that for you. This is my first post ever, and I was content with just being a silent lurker, but something happened to me, and I figured that I could contribute my own story about how I found out my neighbors are terrorists. I'm sure a lot of you already know this, as it made its rounds in the news, but on October 7th, 2020, there was an FBI raid on a trailer in Michigan. This story takes place the night of the raid at around 7:30 p.m. My boyfriend was at home sleeping when I came home from work at around 6:45. I drove into our neighborhood and turned down the street to our house. All seemed normal as I head inside to rouse my sleeping boyfriend, and we prepare to gather our things to go shopping. It takes me a little while to wake him up, and we chat for a bit about my day. As we go to leave our house to go shopping, we're continuing a conversation we were having as we step out onto our front porch. I notice that we're much louder than the outside, and noticed that there were people standing on the end of the road. I stopped mid-sentence, and it's then that I realized how eerily quiet it is, aside from my boyfriend, who was still talking, pleasantly unaware that something was off. I quickly tap his shoulder and try to draw his attention from locking our door to the people gathering in the street. We both look around, and I then notice a police car at the other end of the street, just barely in view. There were two officers speaking to some men beside their large SUV. The SUV was a state car that was parked somewhat sideways, so it was blocking the road, but it had its lights off. I took this as a sign that some mild neighborhood scuffle had occurred, and someone called the cops. A noteworthy thing, but not too uncommon for a mobile home park. We proceeded to our car, and I commented in a somewhat irritated manner that they better move the cop car soon, as they were really blocking traffic. As we made our way out of our driveway, another car turned down our street and headed up the road towards the police car. This gave us the confidence we needed as sheep to follow someone else towards the confrontation. As we slowly crawled up the street in our car, we watched the car in front of us stop and turn at a road that had been left unblocked just in front of the police. We moved to this area somewhat recently and hadn't learned the entire ins and outs of every street in the park yet. Unfortunately, this street was a dead end. As we rounded the corner on the dead-end street, I caught a glimpse of the police, and my irritation immediately melted into confusion and fear when I noticed the large assault rifles that they were carrying. It dawned on me as we made our way toward the end of the road that whatever the police were doing, they weren't here because of some small neighbor fight. I felt my anxiety shoot through the roof as I started rambling about how they had guns, and why would they need such massive firepower outside our house. We turned the car around, and as we came back up to the police blockade, they silently motioned for us to go back down towards our house. We did, but eager to still leave our neighborhood and also hopefully find out just what the hell was going on. We passed our house and turned down a different road trying to go around. At this time, we thought it was weird that there was a cop car with no lights on, yet heavily armed officers standing by around it, and we didn't think that there would be any more. But we were wrong. As we rounded the street, we were immediately greeted by another police car and two more armed men, this time in full military uniform with lights flashing. I think my jaw actually hit the floor as the men started towards our car. I started really freaking out at this point and told my boyfriend to turn around and get us the hell out of there. As we turned around, I noticed out the passenger window that there was someone in handcuffs by the side of the house. He was looking right at us, and his glare made me feel physically ill. When we turned around, we finally found a road that led us out of the park and onto the main road. We got to the grocery store, and recounted all of what had just happened. It took me nearly a full hour to finally stop shaking and to actually process. We thought it was crazy, but assumed it was likely some kind of high-profile drug raid. We found out the next day when the news broke that there were multiple people arrested in a thwarted plot to kidnap our state's governor. The raid had taken place approximately 15 minutes before we left our house, and our dumbasses had no idea. The second time we pulled up on the police blockade, it was right outside the house the raid had taken place at. It really made me stop and reconsider everything that had happened that night, and how suspicious we probably came across. I now have come to terms with the fact that I lived down the street from domestic terrorists. I've also made a point of figuring out multiple routes through our new neighborhood because I realize how dangerous that could be in a more immediate emergency. I don't even want to think about what could have happened if they weren't stopped, and how much crazier that altercation could have been just down the street from our front door. This happened a few nights back, so I'm still replaying it over and over in my head. I thought this would be a good place to share it. I'm a pretty predictable person with a predictable schedule, so I'm not sure if this was a random occurrence or if someone knew my nightly routine. I'm a 36-year-old woman. My husband Rob gets up for work hours before me, so he goes to bed before I do as well. I usually get to bed a few hours after he does, around the same time every night. I turn off the lights and the TV in the living room and take my dog to the back door to let her out. She's tiny, old, and poses zero threat to absolutely anybody. This door leads to a large deck outside. Off to the right of the deck is a few steps down and a small path to the gate, which we always keep chained and locked. Every single night before opening the door, I peek out of the window right next to it without disturbing the blinds and flip on the deck light. I never expect anyone to be there, and we've never had a problem with anyone trespassing or trying to break in. It's just something I do every night out of habit. Kind of like peeking behind the shower curtain before I pee. I know no one is back there, but if I don't check, then that's going to be the one time that there actually is someone hiding there, you know? Hey, I watch a ton of horror movies, and it's pitch black outside at night where I live. So a few nights back, I'm doing the whole thing getting ready for bed. I went to the back door with my dog slowly following behind me, and I peeked out the window. I flipped on the light, and my heart jumped into my throat when I saw a skinny, dirty guy in his 30s standing off to the side of the door, facing it. I see him raise his arm up while holding a screwdriver above his head as soon as the light went on, obviously preparing for someone to open the door. I instinctively scream, "Rob, get up, get the gun," as loud as I can, which startled the guy. And he jumped over the rail of the deck, even though he was standing right next to the stairs. And then he proceeded to run off. My husband came running out of the bedroom with his gun. He called the police, and they showed up within 5 minutes. They drove around the neighborhood trying to find the guy, but no luck. Apparently, the guy broke the lock on our gate to get in. He had also pried open the back screen door, which we always kept locked as well. If I would have opened the door without looking out first, I would have walked right into whatever his plan was. I don't know if I caught the guy trying to break in, or if he was waiting for me to open the door like I do every night. Either way, it was fucking terrifying. Big shout out to my parents who are buying us outdoor security cameras this week as an early birthday present for Rob. Thanks, Mom and Dad. I'm going to rewind about 9 years for this story, back when I was 19 and still living in the town I grew up in. It wasn't the worst place in the world, but it had its share of problems, like any place does. Good neighborhoods, sure, but some rougher parts as well. At the time, the local Walmart hadn't quite slipped into the sketchy category yet, but it was getting close. You could feel it, even if you couldn't quite explain it. It was a typical summer night, humid, quiet, probably around 11 p.m. The Walmart was still open 24 hours back then. My buddy Jay and I were sitting in my car in the middle of the lot, surrounded by other parked cars, just hanging out and listening to The Human Condition by John Bellion, talking about life, women, dreams, the kind of stuff 19-year-old guys talk about when they're convinced they've got the world halfway figured out. That's when I noticed her. There was this woman, mid-40s maybe, walking slowly towards the car. Nothing alarming at first. I just assumed she was heading to her own vehicle, but she wasn't. She stopped right at my passenger side window, leaned down, and tapped. "Please help me," she said, her voice shaking. "I need your help." I cracked the window just enough to hear her over the music. Jay leaned in and asked, "What?" "My car. It broke down," she said. "It's over there, and I could use your help." We looked to where she pointed, around the dark side of the building, near the edge of the lot. I thought I could see the vehicle that she was talking about, a van, and you know the exact van I'm talking about. Windowless, white, rusted. Everything the stranger danger PSAs always told you to avoid. Still, we were 19, slightly into cars, definitely into the idea of being helpful. "Where exactly is your car?" I asked again, cautiously. She gestured once more. "It's just over there. Please." I hesitated. "Okay, start walking over there. We'll follow you to the car." I went to lock the doors just in case, but she moved faster, and in one fluid motion, she yanked the back door handle and pulled it open. "No," she said, climbing into the back seat. "Drive over there." Jay and I froze. Can you get out of the car?" I asked. "Yeah," Jay added a bit more firmly. "Get out of the car." But she didn't move. "No, I need you to drive me. There are guys over there and they're creeping me out. Just drive me to the van, please. I need you to drive me there now." Her voice was urgent, but something about it was just all too off. Too desperate. A bit too rehearsed even. I slid my hand down beside the seat where I keep a small breaker bar. My heart was pounding. "I'm going to ask you one more time," I said, my voice now low. "Get out of the car." And then she snapped. "I'm not getting out of this fucking car. You said you'd help me. I need you to drive me to my car, please. You promised." I looked at Jay. His face was pale, and I knew she wasn't leaving without a scene, or something worse. So I did the only thing I could think of. I put the car in reverse and drove straight to the front entrance of Walmart. People were still going in and out. Bright lights, cameras, safety. She leaned forward. "This isn't where I told you to go. Drive to my van. Drive to the van." That slip. Our van. That's when I knew for sure I was done. I threw the car in park, grabbed the breaker bar, jumped out of the car, and screamed, "Get the f*** out of my car. Now." She flinched, looked around. Dozens of eyes were suddenly on us, and without another word, she bounced. Ran toward the van. The side door of it slid open before she even got there. She jumped in, and that van peeled out of the lot like a bat out of hell. To this day, I don't know what her endgame was, but I know it wasn't anything good. I was lucky. We were lucky. And now I conceal carry. That can be a story for another time, but let's just say I never want to be caught that unprepared ever again. I'm going to go back a ways to set the groundwork for this story. I was pretty much raised by my grandma. My mom and dad were never really great at the whole parent thing, and while they floated in and out of my life, Gran was the one who gave me stability. She couldn't afford much. Her little house sat in the kind of neighborhood where people kept their doors locked at all times, compared to a lot of the stories that you hear here. But what she lacked in money, she made up for with love and consistency. She was the one who packed my lunches, walked me to school, and sat up late helping me with homework that I didn't understand. By the time I finished my education and was ready to step into my own life, my grandma's health began to decline. She started showing signs of Alzheimer's, and it hit me like a punch to the chest. This is the woman who remembered every little thing about me. Favorite snacks, bedtime routines, the names of all my childhood friends. But she was starting to forget the simplest of details. Some people tried to convince me that a nursing home was the only realistic option for her, but I just couldn't do it. She'd been there for me through my entire life, and I refused to abandon her in her time of need. So I packed up my life and moved back in with her, determined to care for her the way that she had cared for me. It wasn't always an easy thing. I worked full-time, which meant I had to leave her during the day, but I made it a point to come home on lunch breaks just to check in. The woman next door, a kind lady named Mrs. White, agreed to pop in occasionally as well. Gran's biggest struggle was remembering the basics, like if she had eaten or not, when to take her medicine, even when to drink water. Without reminders, she'd go half the day with nothing. But she was still the sweetest person you'd ever meet, always smiling, always humming these little tunes that she must have picked up decades ago. So one day, I came home on my lunch break like usual, expecting to find her sitting at the kitchen table with her crossword puzzle or maybe dozing off in front of the TV. Instead, when I opened the door, I heard her voice drifting from out of the kitchen. She was talking to someone. At first, I assumed Mrs. White had come by, but something about the tone just made my stomach tie up. Gran sounded nervous, almost apologetic, as if she were trying to soothe someone. I walked quietly toward the kitchen, and the first thing I saw when I stepped inside was a man bent over my grandmother's purse. He was rifling through it like he had every right in the world to be there. My gran, ever cheerful, was standing nearby, wringing her hands together. "Can't you find it, dear?" she asked this man in the sweetest tone imaginable. The man turned his head toward me once he heard my footsteps. His eyes were wide, jittery, and they did something to me that made me want to take a step back. But after that immediate urge settled, I said, "Who the hell are you?" trying my best to sound intimidating. Now that wasn't easy. I'm a petite woman, not exactly the picture of menace, and this guy looked like he could snap me in half if he wanted to. Still though, I didn't want to let him see my fear. Before he could answer, my grandma piped up with a smile. "This is your cousin Danny, dear. He came for the money, you see?" That's when the blood drained from my face. Cousin Danny? I don't have one of those. I don't have any cousins at all. "Gran," I said, my eyes never leaving this man's. "We don't know this man." She giggled like I'd made some sort of silly mistake. "Of course you do, darling. He came for the money. He's going to be buying us a new camper." She launched into one of her stories about the time she and I went on a camping trip when I was 6, about how magical it had been, how I'd begged for s'mores every night we were out there. I could see her eyes sparkling with this memory, all while this stranger stood inches from her, practically salivating over her purse. I did my best to study him. There's no telling where this could go. He was lean, wiry, and he didn't appear to have a weapon. Maybe he was high, certainly desperate. Either way, I knew if he decided to get violent, things could go bad very quickly. That's when I said, with a voice low and steady, "Get out, right now." He stared at me, looking like he was sizing me up, probably calculating his chances to snap my neck. "Follow me out of here," I added, shifting my tone just a little bit. "I'll give you all the cash I've got on me, but you're walking out of here right now." To my shock, the dude seemed to hesitate, but then he nodded. Without another word, he shuffled past me out through the front door. I kept my distance, but followed close enough to make sure that he wasn't going to double back. And the second he stepped over the threshold, I slammed the door shut, locked it, and leaned against it, heart pounding so hard I thought it might break my ribs. Dude didn't turn back though. He didn't bang against the door or try to kick it down. I think he just left. Whether it was I caught him in the act or now he was outside and visible to the public, I don't know, but something had changed because he just dipped out. When I got back to the kitchen, my grandma was sitting at the table smiling to herself. "Remember Disney World?" she asked, drifting seamlessly into another one of her stories, like there wasn't just some stranger in her house trying to rob her. My stomach turned to lead when I went to check her things. Her purse was empty of the small pill organizer she kept. All of her medication for the week gone. In the bathroom, the little hook where she always hung up her wedding ring was bare. That ring had survived decades, and now it was just gone in the wind. I didn't need to imagine what might have happened if I hadn't come home when I did. He could have taken much more than jewelry and pills. My grandmother, with her failing memory and infinite trust for others, could have been persuaded to leave with him, or something far worse. That was the moment I realized that I couldn't do this alone anymore. I wasn't enough, no matter how much I loved her. If someone could get into the house that easily, trick her without any issue, what was to stop it from happening again? Next time, I might not be there to stop it. So that's what led me to making the hardest decision of my life. I moved her into a nursing home nearby. It literally tore me apart, but I knew it was for her safety. The staff there adored her immediately. Even in her later stages, she had that magnetic sweetness that made people just fall in love with her. I visited often, and she always lit up when she saw me, though sometimes she thought I was her sister, maybe her mother. Sometimes just some kind stranger stopping by. Every now and then, she would bring up Cousin Danny and the camper. She'd smile about it like she was in a dream, retelling the story as though it were some cherished family memory. Each time, I would just kind of play along, nodding and smiling and never correcting her. It was just easier that way. But every time she mentioned him, I felt that same chill sent down my spine. The reality was, we'd never had a Cousin Danny, and the man she remembered so fondly wasn't a relative. He was a predator who saw an easy target in an old, trusting woman. I try not to dwell on what could have happened that day, but sometimes I just can't help it. At best, he would have gladly drained her of money and possessions, leaving her confused and heartbroken, even if just for a minute. At worst, well, I don't even like to finish that thought. What I do know is this: if I hadn't have walked in when I did, I might have lost more than my grandma's ring and some medicine. I might have lost her entirely, and that thought scares me more than anything else. So this happened at my old job back when I was still pretty green in the whole adulting world. I had two coworkers I got along with well enough, a guy and a woman. The woman was Muslim and wore a hijab. Don't get me wrong, that's not usually important, but it kind of becomes relevant later, so hang in there. We all had to go on this work trip together. It was far from glamorous, just a few days out of town to help with a project. The first day out went fine. We did our jobs, checked into the hotel, and everyone seemed in good spirits. That night, both of them invited me to go out to dinner with them, but I was honestly beat. I figured we'd have plenty of time to socialize later, so I turned them down, went back to my room, and crashed. The next morning, though, I noticed that there was something off with my coworkers. The guy seemed a little quieter than usual. He didn't really want to talk much and kind of kept to himself. When it was time to drive to the site, he pretty much insisted that I ride in the front seat with him, which struck me as odd. I mean, it wasn't exactly a big deal, but his tone made it feel like he really didn't want to be in front with our other coworker. I didn't push it, but it stuck in my mind as weird. Anyway, we got through that day fine, but later that evening, my female coworker invited us both to hang out in her hotel room and have some drinks. Nothing too crazy, just a couple of beers, maybe a movie together. I figured, why not? It was a work trip, and we were all stuck in the same boring town anyway. At first, it was completely normal. We sat around, drank a little bit, and just talked about random stuff. Kids, work, funny stories. I was even starting to think that having a work friend colleague group that was a little bit older than me actually was really cool. They saw life in a different way than I did. They had more experience. It would be cool to kind of pick their brains over things. But right around then is when things started to get strange. Out of nowhere, the lady coworker turned her attention to our male coworker and started hitting on him. I mean, blatantly. Telling him he should take off his shirt, asking him weird personal questions, just crossing lines that felt wildly inappropriate, especially considering he's happily married. The kicker is, so is she. At least that's what I thought coming into this whole thing. I watched the color drain from his face. You could tell he was uncomfortable, but he tried to laugh it off at first. Eventually, it seemed like it got to be too much for him, and he excused himself from the group and said he was heading to bed. Now, before anyone says that I should have spoken up or left too, you have to remember this. This is my very first real job. They're both older than me, and I honestly thought maybe this was just some awkward grown-up flirting dynamic, one that I didn't understand. So instead of bowing out along with him, I stayed behind. And man, I regret that decision even now. When it was just the two of us, she shifted gears almost entirely. Now she was showing me pictures of her kids and talking about her family, which, on its own, normal enough. After what she had just pulled with our coworker, seems a little weird. I was grappling with all of this when she randomly pulls out her phone and heads over to Instagram. She pulls up some page of a male model. I wouldn't say this guy's super famous, just one of those wannabe influencer types with maybe a couple thousand followers. The guy was objectively attractive, but nothing about his page screamed celebrity. That's when she leaned in with these wide, unblinking eyes and told me that she was having an affair with this man, that he was in love with her, and that she was divorcing her husband any day now just so she could run off with this guy. She spoke about it so matter-of-factly, like it was a done deal, and that kind of short-circuited my brain. I didn't know what to say at that point, so I just nodded along, but inside I was screaming, what the hell is happening right now? Things only seemed to get worse the further down this path we went. She navigated away from Instagram. Now she's in her photo roll, and she's scrolling through photos of him. Only these weren't like the ones on his Instagram. These were pictures she had clearly taken without this man knowing. Paparazzi-style shots of him walking down the street, getting into his car, all taken from a great distance away. She had pictures of his workplace, his friends and family. She even had screenshots of conversations he'd had with other people online. And then God knows how she got those. That was the moment that alarm bells really started blaring for me. This wasn't some woman exaggerating a fling to impress me. This lady was showcasing her stalker behavior. Full-on, terrifying, obsessive stalker behavior. I felt a bit ill. My skin actually prickled because I knew deep down that something was really, really wrong. She had this look on her face, like a kind of manic intensity that I don't think I could even properly describe. It was a sort of look where you just know you're not dealing with someone who's all the way there, someone who's not quite stable anymore. And then, as if things weren't already nightmarish, she reached up, untied her hijab, and pulled it off. I can tell you now that I wasn't prepared for what I saw. Her head was covered in bald patches, just random tufts of hair clinging here and there. It was like something you'd see out of a horror movie. The way the dim hotel lighting hit her face while she stared at me with those wild eyes. I know it probably sounds mean to even mention her appearance, but you've got to understand. It wasn't just how she looked. It was the entire combination of everything. The obsessive ranting about some guy who clearly didn't know her. The stalker photos. That intensity in her expression. And then suddenly revealing something so vulnerable in an absolutely creepy context. My stomach was basically on the floor at that point. Every instinct inside of me screamed to get out of that room. I managed to get something out like, I'm getting kind of tired. I think I'll head back to my room. I remember my voice shaking a little bit, but I stood up, moved towards the door like there wasn't any other option. She just looked at me with this flat expression and said, okay. No argument, no attempt to stop me, just that one word in this weirdly monotone voice. I left as calmly as I could, but the second I got out into the hallway, I speed-walked all the way back to my room. I locked the door behind me and sat in there trying to unpack what I'd just gone through for a good hour. I eventually went to bed, and the next day, she acted like nothing had happened. Completely normal during business hours. Chatting about work, laughing at little things, like the entire previous evening had been a fever dream of mine. I didn't know whether to feel relieved or terrified about that. Later, away from this woman, when I finally worked up the courage, I asked my other coworker why he'd been acting so off the day before. He just gave me this uncomfortable look and said, she made a move on me. That's all he said. I don't think he had to say more because even in my young brain, it was enough for me to understand exactly what he meant. I still don't know what this woman's deal was, whether it's mental health issues or something else entirely. That night still sticks in my head as one of the strangest nights of my life. I don't know what was going on in that woman's head for most of our trip, or why she chose to involve us in her break from reality. I can say with absolute certainty, though, that the next time a work trip comes up, I won't be spending any of my downtime in her hotel room with her. That was plenty for me. I feel like I've written and rewritten this story a dozen times, and it just never feels good enough. Little disclaimer here. I'm in a really bad depression right now, so trying to function, much less adequately explain one of the most traumatic experiences of my life, in a cohesive and engaging way, feels like attempting to run a marathon through wet cement. I've been exhausting my brain trying to write about this experience. I keep giving up because it's daunting and overwhelming to try and organize all my thoughts into how I'm feeling. I'm a perfectionist. It's a long story, and there were a lot of elements at play that allowed for this to happen. So I usually give up when trying to explain it. My goal is to just get this out there and try to recount my experience as best as I can. I hate writing about this because even though it was 2 years ago, I still really struggle to come to terms with the fallout of what happened. And I don't want people thinking I'm just stupid for doing what I did. This man fooled a lot of people, not just me. But I have to believe I never would have behaved the way I did if I was thinking rationally. I'm hoping this will be cathartic to just let out, so please bear with me. Okay, here goes. This friendship was short-lived, but it all started in October of 2016. I was 24 and living in Mission Valley in San Diego at the time. I love living there because it's pretty central to all the action in San Diego. 15 minutes away from the beach and downtown, but not run down or overcrowded like some parts of SD. The apartment I was living in was in a nicer development, and luxury apartments were being built across the street. Basically, a pretty safe area. This morning, I decided to go for a run to the Fenton Parkway Shopping Center. In it, there's a bunch of restaurants along with a Costco, IKEA, and the Mission Valley Library. This center also has a trolley stop. That's important. My plan that morning was to run to the center and treat myself to Starbucks as a reward for working out. I remember exactly what I was wearing, too. Running shorts and one of those shirt tanks with the sides cut off where you can see the sports bra underneath. Equipped with the pink sports bra, just doing my thing. I get there and I'm finishing up my Starbucks when my dad calls me. I answered the phone and my dad fills me in that my younger brother Daniel is in the hospital. This wasn't shocking news to me. My parents had been debating about whether or not he should go in. I'd said the night before that I thought he should. There's a little crucial backstory to this and why they were telling me at all. Mental illness sucks, and it runs in my family. My mom has suffered from depression since I was born, and my little brother had been showing signs and symptoms of someone who was developing schizophrenia. My whole family was worried about him, and the night before I had talked to my folks and advised them that he should go to an inpatient to at least be safe. I myself had 2 episodes of extremely bad depression in my lifetime at this point, and they fucking sucked. 2015, 2016 had been the worst years of my life, and ultimately culminating in a hospital stay after months of refusing to be helped. This was in July of 2016, and it was a turning point for me. I got on medication, reconnected with family and friends after isolating for a year, and began to rebuild my life. It obviously wasn't that easy, but things totally turned around for the better, and by October of 2016, when this story takes place, I was happier than I'd ever been before. If it sounds like a complete 180, well, that's because it was. Cue a bipolar cycle that I wasn't even aware I was having. More of a side note, and sorry for the extensive backstory, but I'm really just trying to explain and also process this. I've always struggled with social anxiety to a degree. Even without depression, I get anxious and am too hyper-aware of myself when interacting with a group. I'm really friendly, and I think I hide it well. But at the core, I'm pretty introverted and reserved. I'm sure everyone experiences this to some degree themselves, but I remember envying others where total social ease just seemed to come naturally. It never had for me, but in fall of 2016, it was different. Confidence. I suddenly had tons of it. Looking back at things, it was clear I was just hypomanic. But at the time, I had no idea that this is what was happening. I just felt like I was self-actualizing and finally the person I wanted to be. Confident, pretty, smart, generous, kind. I had the words to say and could strike up a conversation with anyone. More than that, though, I wanted to. I felt like I connected with everyone and could be anyone's friend. I was really spiritual at this time too. I grew up a pastor's kid and have always had faith, but now more than ever, I felt connected to God, and I swear I was seeing signs of his existence everywhere. Also, a common trend in mania that I didn't know about. I learned about this later. Manic thinking leads you to make some extremely poor choices in judgment. A lot of people blow through finances and make reckless decisions when manic. That can at least point you in the direction that this story's headed. While I'm on the phone with my dad, I kind of distractedly started walking around the center. I make my way over to the library parking lot, and there's a few people milling around because it hasn't opened yet. Honestly, I was in my own little world with this conversation and didn't really care if people could overhear me. Normally, I hate talking on the phone in public, but Kelly 2.0 didn't give a shit. I remember praying with my dad for my little brother's health and talking about how life is crazy because I had been in a similar situation just a few months back, of feeling hopelessly suicidal. Totally oversharing in public, but whatever. I got off the call and get a tap on my shoulder. "Excuse me, miss?" I turn around. A short black man in his 60s, wearing a hat that says Navy on it, is standing to my right. "Excuse me, I couldn't help but overhear your conversation. Are you a Christian?" "Why, yes," I said that I was. "I am too. My name's Tony, and I just wanted to say I'm inspired by your faith. I wanted to ask, is it okay if I pray for your brother as well?" I was honestly so touched by the kindness of this random stranger. It was a bold thing to do, but at the time, I just remember being really inspired and moved that he would offer to pray with me. I actually thought he might be a pastor or something, as he had that vibe. People talk about creeps and how they're dirty and classically creepy looking. I honestly didn't get that feeling from this guy, like at all. Also, this was 9 a.m. on a sunny October morning, with tons of other people around. I didn't feel threatened in the least. He wasn't asking for anything, and I was a lot bigger than him. I would guess he's about 5'5", while I'm nearly 6 feet tall. I said sure, and we moved to a bench where he prays a short prayer. Short, but really meaningful. During his prayer at one point, he puts his hand on my knee. I'm uncomfortable with this and was about to shift, but before I'm about to, he removes it. I was too polite to say anything, and he just continued on praying. A lot of people in church will lay hands on each other to pray as a sign of comfort, and so this isn't something setting off huge alarm bells. But I remember how I felt in that second vividly, exposed and uncomfortable. Now I look back on what I was wearing and I feel absolutely sick. It's so painfully obvious why I was approached, but at the time, I was naively trusting in the goodness of strangers. After that, I kind of forget how the conversation went exactly, but we basically launched into a super deep conversation about life. I would normally never be this open with a stranger, but he caught me at the right time, and he was really funny and well-spoken. He tells me that he's a Navy veteran. I revealed that I used to work with vets as a nurse, and we bond over that. He says his wife Gloria was a nurse, but she died back in 2005, and after that, things went downhill for him. I talked about my past year and how hard it had been, and he said he could definitely relate to struggle. He revealed that he was living in a shelter and goes to the library every day because he's studying to go back to school with some military-assisted program, and that he's only survived this long because of his faith. I forget what else we talked about in all honesty, but the conversation lasted for over an hour outside in the sunshine. This guy was incredibly insightful and eloquent. He had some really good insights into the Bible, and it's clear that he knew his stuff. Before I leave, he asked if I wanted to stay in touch, maybe even meet at the library again for a Bible study. I said sure. We exchanged email addresses, and I remember running home thinking how cool it was. Human connection and meeting another strong Christian and all of that. Well, 2 days later, I get an email from Tony. I open it up, and I'm surprised because for how well-spoken he was in person, this dude had the writing of a 10-year-old on AIM. All caps and run-on sentences. I still have all the emails, so here's what he wrote. "Hello, didn't have time to write to you, but today I have. We need to see each other and then you can update me on how your brother is doing. I miss you extremely and not ashamed to say it. The Lord has a word for you, and I want to tell you in person. Let's set up a date for this to happen. I will be here at the library tomorrow and we can meet here, okay?" Anyway, there is so much going on in your life, but I want you to reflect on this. There is a time and a place for everything under the sun. I, this day, choose the word faith. It's ongoing for you, but your faith is faltering when it comes to your brother. You see him hurting, and you want it to be over quickly. Well, sorry, love. This is going to take time and some sacrifice on your part. Anyway, contact me today if you see this. I will be here until 3 p.m. today. I made a mental note to get back to him, but got distracted and forgot. I ended up getting this the next day. I'm sure you are very, very busy with things on the home front, but at least advise me of what's going on because I do love you as a sister in Christ and want you happy. It's been 2 days now, so I'm starting to worry about you. So please advise. And also I sent you an invite to hang out where we can talk. Talk to me, honey. I emailed him back updating him on my brother and said I would be free to meet up the following week. His response: I'm happy to hear that your brother is doing better. And yes, I can meet you here at the library on Wednesday. It will be great to see you again. I will be here by 8:30. Anyway, my life has been a pure blessing by knowing you and receiving your spiritual love. It only comes from God, as I do know I love you so very much. Hope things are going well for you, and I look forward to our next encounter. I'm homeless, but I have a home in glory, so don't fret about the place and the circumstances I have found myself in. I had a dream about you the other night. I will tell you next time I see you. It was awe-inspiring. Read Matthew 4:19. It'll give you a clue. I've reread his emails cringing at so many red flags. It makes me want to punch myself in the face, actually. I'm an adult woman. I'm not an 8-year-old. This guy is pushy. He would call me honey, boo, love. I know it's obviously weird, but at the time, I truly dismissed it just as the way he would talk, and just a term of endearment in grandpa sort of way. As an older black man, it was sort of what made him funny. I told my cousin Emily about meeting Tony, and that we planned to meet up. She texted me this: Kel, if you do decide to do this, please meet in a public place and please bring Scott. Scott is my older brother who I lived with at the time. He's 2 years older than me, 6'7", and one of my best friends. You have a beautiful heart and don't know how pretty you are. I don't want this guy getting the wrong idea. I definitely remember laughing at the thought of some romantic thing. This dude was literally old enough to be my grandpa and looks like a taller cousin of Gary Coleman. It was comical to me. There's no way I'm interested, and he obviously knows I'm not interested. We were meeting for a Bible study. But then my head returns to that moment at the library and thinks, I should just to be safe. Scott agrees to go with me. I didn't mention it to Tony that he'd be coming because it was kind of a last-minute plan. And honestly, even though I enjoyed the meeting the first time, I also had a life and other things going on in it. So I didn't want to meet for more than an hour because I had shit to do. We get to Safeway next to the library, and Tony's there waiting. I introduce him to my brother, and Tony cracks a few jokes about how he feels so short next to Scott. We all laughed and started talking together. After about 5 minutes, Tony makes this comment: Well, it's nice to meet you, Scott. I hope to see you again soon. As in, basically dismissing him. Scott and I exchange glances, and Scott replies that he drove me here, so he's going to join in. Tony doesn't skip a beat and says the more the merrier. I remember feeling relieved. We ended up talking for about an hour, and it truly is another great conversation. We had our Bible study, and it was really engaging. Scott and I bought him a sandwich, and we had lunch together. After we left the meetup, I asked Scott what he thought. Scott thought he was really nice too. Cool guy. We both acknowledged the fact that Tony obviously thought he was meeting with just me, and how Scott felt like he was expected to leave at first. But we chalked it up to Tony just not expecting Scott to stay for the Bible study. Thank you for a wonderful morning, and again for the nourishment. It'll be great. I had a great time chatting with your brother. He seems like a good man. Any woman who finds him will be more than lucky. Next we meet, just let me know. I will continue praying for your loved one. It'll be fine, I guarantee it. I promise. I love you so much for being the friend I now have. I will be there for you no matter what. Love, your BFF Tony. Reading these emails now makes me shudder. But I honestly just chalked it up to him being lonely and genuinely looking for a friend. We continued to email back and forth. For every one email I would send, Tony would send back 3 or 4. At one point, he sends me this: "Send me a pic of you so I can look at it when I need that extra smile." And I did. I felt straight weird sending it, but I swear to God, I opened up my photo booth and took a picture of me making a funny face and waving at the camera. I didn't tell anyone he asked for a picture because I knew it sounded textbook creepy, but I rationalized it in my head that he was old and lonely. He told me he loved me like he would love a daughter. I think we met up 4 more times. Tony lived out in Santee, but would take the trolley to Mission Valley. We met up once more at Starbucks, but Scott didn't make it for that. I didn't really have any qualms about it at this point. I didn't ask why he was homeless or how he got there, and he never volunteered the information. To this day, I wonder if I had asked, what he would have said. It felt rude of me to pry, and I figured in due time he would just naturally open up about it. The second time, I invited him to attend church with Scott and I. The church we went to is made up of mostly young adults. This Sunday night, after the service, the church was hosting a barbecue/fellowship night. Tony definitely stood out, but he held his own, and during the event, I saw him talking to a couple of the guys from church. I was glad. I wanted him to meet other Christian men and make more friendships because honestly, it was starting to get kind of suffocating. Tony kept saying that Scott and I were his only friends, but he only ever communicated with me. On the drive home, I specifically remember him telling me that he introduced himself to Pastor Wes, our pastor, and he relayed the conversation they had. Remember all of this because I swear it's important. November rolls around, and after our last meeting, Tony mentioned his birthday was coming up. I talked to Scott, and because I wanted Tony to feel like he had some sort of family on his birthday, he told me he had no one. We agreed to invite him over for dinner. A super obvious PSA that probably no one needs to hear, but I needed to. Do not invite a homeless stranger into your home, no matter how nice they may seem. Dear God, I was genuinely trying to make the guy feel welcomed and loved, and it was because of the stigma of homelessness that I wanted to do the opposite and show him that I wasn't afraid to let him see where I lived. Homelessness itself is dehumanizing, and I wanted him to feel like a person on his birthday. Scott was way more hesitant about letting him come over. I advocated for Tony, and eventually Scott agreed. I told him to bring his laundry and I would wash it for him, and we let him wash up beforehand in my bathroom. Stupid, stupid, stupid. I also invited my best friend Grace and her boyfriend Robert. I did the cooking. I had asked him what his favorite meal was. Steak with tons of caramelized onions and butter, salad with Russian dressing, mashed potatoes, and a Dutch apple pie. I went to Ralph's and blew $80 on the ingredients to make it. Tony was super grateful and said it was the best meal he'd had since his wife passed away. I mentioned that I had a psychiatrist appointment the next day. Tony at this time had gotten one of those Obama phones and would call every once in a while. I was honestly kind of wary about it because he now had another way to stay in touch with me, and it was draining trying to keep up with him. I have 2 voicemails of his saved. I want you to take a listen. This guy is textbook manipulative. Note the changes in his voice between the 2. He sounds like a completely different person in the second one. This first message was right after his birthday dinner.
Hey, I just want to again thank you for being a gracious host this morning, and I appreciate all that you're doing for me, and I'm praying that if you're at the doctor that everything is okay with you physically as well as mentally. But anyway, I want to thank you for being a gracious host to me, and I am in love with an angel. Yes, I am, and you know it.
The second one, I was running late meeting him, and he was not happy about it.
Hey, Kelly, this is Antonio. Listen, I'm over here at the Starbucks. So if you're going to drive up over here, that'll be fine. I've got everything set up, and I don't want to have to move this suitcase. It's really crummy. I really don't want to have to do that. So just know that I'm here at Starbucks, and you'll see me as soon as you come into the door. I'll be waiting for you. Okay? Call me back or text me and let me know whether or not you received this message. I'll see you when you get here. Love you so very much, my brother. So very much. Bye for now.
Sunday rolls around, and Tony joins Scott and I for church again. Afterwards, a big group of us decides to go to this Mediterranean place. Everyone orders, and by the time we get seated, it's me, Scott, Tony, our friend Brandon, and my friend Julia at one end of the table. Tony and Brandon get to talking. I wasn't really paying that much attention because I was chatting it up with Julia. I had paid for Tony's meal, and he originally tried to order some catfish dish. It was actually one of the most expensive items on the menu. Also sounded disgusting to me, but I was happy to do it. The restaurant was out of it. I remember this distinctly. When the waitress came back to the table to tell Tony that they were out, he made a huge deal about it. Just kind of abrasive, sighing like he was personally offended, and was sort of demeaning to the waitress when she offered up other options. I remember feeling both apologetic toward the waitress and honestly kind of intimidated by Tony. Once he got the replacement dish, he was back to joking around and being friendly. I chalked it up to him being just tired and hungry. After dinner, I offered to drive Tony home, and I did so, alone. When he wasn't at the shelter, he said he lived on a bench way out in Santee. I remember this night it had kind of started to rain. I felt really bad for Tony, and he had a way of making you feel bad for him too, for being homeless, both in his emails and in person. Driving out to the bench in the cold, I felt both a nagging obligation to offer him a dry place to sleep and the disconcerting feeling like he was expecting me to offer. I actually had previously considered it, but both Scott and I discussed it, and we didn't want to invite him over to spend the night even once, for fear of setting up a pattern or expectation in the future. I'm nearing the bench, and he makes it clear he's unhappy and tired of being homeless. "I'm so sick of this. You're the only good thing in my life, Kelly." We chat for a bit, and I try to encourage him, and we make plans for me to pick him up for church the next week. Right before he exits the car, he leans over and gives me a quick kiss goodbye. On the lips. Nope, not okay. I'm definitely uncomfortable with that. I felt immediately weird and violated. I kind of stammer out a goodbye and pull out of the parking lot, leaving Tony just standing there, watching me as I go. Driving home, I felt gross. I'm also now uncomfortable as it dawns on me that I just drove a man 40 years older than me, that I really barely even know, to an area with no one else around at night. These are huge no-nos that up until this point, I was oblivious to, because hypomanic me just thought I was making a positive impact in Grandpa Tony's life. I get home and was probably there about 30 minutes when Scott gets a text from Brandon. I hadn't told Scott about the kiss at this point. I asked Scott what he and Brandon were talking about, and that's when he shared the text with me. Basically, Brandon had asked what the vibe was that Scott got from Tony. Scott said he thought he was all right, but Brandon wasn't of the same belief. He said that he thinks Tony is a pathological liar, due to making some pretty serious claims about being in the Navy for 8 years, yet reaching a rank that some people work their entire lives to get. There were other holes in Tony's story according to Brandon, but this was the first one to stick out. I have this gut feeling, a sinking one. Scott and I talk about it. Maybe Tony's just overcompensating for the fact that he's homeless. He goes by Tony, but I knew his full name from his email address. I hadn't bothered to look him up before. He told me he had no social media accounts and didn't know the first thing about setting one up. I remember teasing him that he should join the 21st century. I never searched him up because there was no reason to. I type his name into Google, and the first thing that pops up makes me want to hurl. It's a mugshot for Megan's Law, and the Tony in the picture is terrifying. This man is a violent, registered sex offender. I instantly feel sick to my stomach and terrified. I had been with this guy less than an hour ago, alone, way out in the middle of nowhere Santee. The next result after his mugshot was his Facebook profile, the one he said he never had. I can't stop myself from clicking on it. I wanted to know everything about this guy. All he has is a single profile picture and 1,500 friends, all women, all young women, my age. I then head over to Instagram and search his name. Sure enough, he's there as well. The only people he follows are Instagram models in lingerie, women with bare asses and huge tits, along with BDSM stuff. He has 20 followers and every single one is a sex-related chat for money type account. I call my cousin and aunt, who advised me to report this guy to the police. He hasn't done anything against the law though, really, and I feel both gross and conflicted with what to do. He's preying upon young women, and I was stupid enough to fall for it. I called up Pastor Wes because I knew he had spoken with Tony and Scott, and I was kind of at odds with what to do. I explained the situation since Wes is at least familiar with Tony. "Oh, that guy that you bring every few weeks?" "Yeah, I vaguely remember him. Wes meets a lot of people every Sunday, so I assumed he just forgot." I remind him about the conversation he had with Tony. "Kelly, I've never spoken to him or even had an interaction with that guy. The only reason I know who he is and remember him is because he was really rude to Monica at the barbecue, because she wouldn't let him in the kitchen." Monica is Wes's wife. Huh. Now, I remember Tony had told me explicitly that they had talked. He had even given a word-for-word relay of their conversation. But apparently, that never happened. Instantly, everything has a new meaning and an extra sinister twist to it. I feel both incredibly violated and just so mindfucked that someone could lie that effortlessly straight to my face without missing a beat. I didn't even ask him about Wes. Tony was the one who brought him up. I thought about all the other conversations we'd had, and now I know this guy was just saying whatever he felt like in order to gain my trust, which he had done. I'd let this guy into my home, let him shower in my shower, shown him pictures of my family. Long story not short, after discovering this and talking to my friends and family, I reported Tony to the police and sent him an email explaining that I didn't want any contact with him anymore. I still had some of his laundry at my house, and I didn't want to give him any excuse to come by and get it. In the email, I told him his clothes were clean and he could pick them up at the church, but not to contact me anymore. I was hoping that would be the end of it. I blocked his number, but I hadn't on Gmail. Email after email. He sent me dozens of them, pleading to talk so he could explain himself. I didn't take the bait though. My friend who actually works for Gavin DeBecker, he wrote the book The Gift of Fear, and it's all about predators who use manipulation to take advantage of you. Advised me this: never respond to a stalker. Even if you ignore 500 messages and respond to only one, all that has taught the stalker is that he needs to keep bothering you until he gets a response. The emails started off kindly enough, then turned accusatory. He actually threatened to unalive himself in one. I let the police know because these emails were coming in non-stop. Then I blocked him. For the next few days, I was terrified to be in my apartment alone. I didn't go anywhere by myself. I bought a mace and a taser online, and anytime I needed to drive somewhere or return home, I would call Scott or a friend so they could walk me to and from my car if I was by the apartment. Thankfully, Thanksgiving break was the next week, so I had a reprieve from the paranoia when Scott and I were home visiting family. Once we returned to San Diego, a few days passed, and by this point, it had been 2 weeks since I blocked Tony. No word or sight from him during this time, and although I was extremely anxious to be home alone by myself, with each passing day I grew a little bit more relieved. If he hadn't come by up to this point, he probably got the message to leave me alone. It was December 4th. Scott had made previous plans to visit LA the upcoming weekend to visit friends, and I had obligations in San Diego, so I felt okay to stay here by myself while he went out of town. The night before, Grace and Robert were hosting a party to celebrate Robert's graduation from EMT school. Knowing we'd be drinking and having a good time, my friend Michaela planned to spend the night and we would Uber over there together. The night was a blast, and we got home at 2 a.m, buzzed and happy. The next morning, I made her breakfast and she left shortly after. It was no later than 10 a.m. 10 minutes after Michaela left, I get a knock at the door. I'm praying it's Michaela, realizing that she forgot something, but I had this huge knot in my stomach as I approached the peephole. I look out and scream internally when I see that it's Tony. Thank God the door was locked because even though I didn't answer or say a word, Tony knew I was home. My car was in the driveway. He didn't say anything. He just pounded on the door, relentlessly. There's a window if you walk around the door where you can see into the apartment, and even though it was closed, I was freaked out that he would walk around and see me. I ran into Scott's bathroom, which is the farthest thing away from the door. I had a kitchen knife with me, my mace, my taser, and I called 911. I could still hear him pounding on the door. I frantically explained to the 911 operator the situation, and they said that they would send someone over. I hang up and FaceTime Grace and Robert to let them know what's going on, and they get into their car and head to my apartment. While this is all happening, the knocking eventually stops, and I'm praying that he's given up and left. But that's when I hear a crash on the balcony. I can't see out there, and there's no way in hell that I'm leaving the bathroom. But I'm positive that this climbed over the railing and was now trying to get in through the sliding glass door. Fucking A, was the balcony door locked? I was 99% sure it was because I'd been vigilant and paranoid about locking all the doors. But having come home buzzed the night before, I couldn't remember if I had double-checked it before bed. That 1% of uncertainty was absolutely terrifying. I called 911 again in a panic, explaining that this man is now trying to break in. The dispatcher asked if he has weapons, and I honestly don't know what to say. The guy is dangerous, he's cunning, and he had told me himself that he carries a switchblade on the street for protection. Out of all the lies he told me, I do believe that he was in the military and probably had some combat training at least. The dispatcher tells me to stay on the line until the police arrive. I can't hear anything, and I don't know if that's because he's given up or if it's because he opened the door and is now inside my house. In that moment, I honestly thought I was going to die. I thought Tony was going to break in, assault me, and eventually kill me. My mind just broke in fear. I remember frantically praying over and over again 1,000,000 times. That's when I hear a loud pounding on the front door once more. Only this time, it's accompanied by loud yells of police. I was so terrified that it could be Tony pretending to be a police officer, but the 911 dispatcher assured me that it was indeed the police at my door. I open up the door in a frenzy. 4 cops are standing there. 2 are next to my door, and the other 2 are a little off to the side with Tony. I had an actual breakdown seeing him. I just started sobbing. I was freaking out and inconsolable. The cops took him away, and the main officer was extremely kind and comforting. He gave me instructions on how to file a restraining order. Having that experience becoming so paranoid about Tony triggered full-blown mania in me. I couldn't sleep at all for 2 nights straight after this happened, and posted on social media constantly, messaging everyone. I started believing I'd survived death and come out with all these mind-blowing observations on the other side. So, yeah. Looking back on it, it's embarrassing, the stuff that I put out on Facebook. But that's its own story. My family had already been concerned, and this was the tipping point. I got admitted to the hospital and ended up staying there for 2 weeks, having become full-blown psychotic at that point. Once I was more stabilized, the hospital issued me a day pass so I could get my restraining order from the court downtown. I had to face Tony in court to do this, and it was awful. I was praying that he wouldn't show, but he did. Brandon and Scott testified, and then it was Tony's turn to speak. This guy straight out lied to the judge's face that this was a mutual relationship, that I was the one in love with him, and that I had changed my mind, and the only reason he went by my house that day was to pick up his laundry. I didn't even have his fucking laundry, and he knew it. Watching this guy lie and turn on the charm was disgusting, and I was sitting in the chair trembling while he did it. My turn to speak. I presented the judge with printouts of every single email he ever sent me, his Facebook account and Instagram accounts with all the young women. Tony was shocked that I had evidence, but no duh. She threw the book at him. It felt like something from Law & Order, I swear. Gave him this whole speech to never take advantage of a young woman again, or he would have to answer to her. In that moment, it felt like sweet, sweet justice. He wasn't allowed to be within 100 yards of me and was ordered to stay away from the Fenton Parkway Center. I never saw Tony again, and I've moved since. The paranoia after lasted for a long, long time. From this experience, I now know that the mood swings I'd been having years past was manic depression, and that I have BPD. Shit sucks, and right now, I'm back in a fucking sinkhole of depression. But yeah, fun times. I apologize for such a long post. I can imagine that's not everybody's cup of tea. But for those of you who stuck around till the bitter end, I want to say thank you for giving me your time and a platform to get all of this out there. I don't know what percentage of healing involves getting all of your internal thoughts out there in some way, but after sharing this, I feel about 50 pounds lighter. Thank you again. I'm an avid Reddit user, although not usually on this sub, but after sharing just a snippet of this story elsewhere, I was encouraged to share it here. This took place about 7 summers ago in the hometown of the Dallas Cowboys. While I'm not from there originally, I'd been living there for quite some time, and I was aware that it was far from a perfect city. I knew that there was a huge human trafficking issue. I actually had a coworker pulled out of work and put in a safe house by the FBI because she decided to snitch on her family, who was involved in such things. However, I never thought that these people randomly snatched people off the streets. In all the stories I'd ever heard, there was the use of drugs or some form of coercion. So this particular summer, I'm cycling to a smoke shop. It's kind of out of my way and not in a great part of the city, but I'm pretty confident. It's daylight out. I ride all over the city and I know the store. At the time, I was 24, short, and had short pink hair, but I'd always considered myself too intimidating to kidnap. I forget that even if I'm a veteran, I'm also a short white girl. I pull up to a crosswalk and I'm waiting for a light when 2 guys start catcalling me from a windowless white van. Now, just like most other young women, I'm not impervious to getting catcalled. But this wasn't the classical nice tits comment or other locker room bullshit. These guys would take turns talking to each other and then yell through a cracked window about how they were going to get me or that I was next. It felt off, like they were particularly excited to see a single woman by herself. But I just flipped them both off and rode away. End of the story, right? Well, over a mile later, I'm right around the block from my destination. To set up the visual, there was this massive empty lot, really more like 2 lots on my right-hand side. That was the side that I was riding down. To my left, there was a back fence of a very, very old and likely abandoned house. It was like that all around this neighborhood. A lot of drifters and old people in poverty. A few trap houses even. The point is, there was no one else visible, and even if they had seen what I'm about to explain, nobody would have intervened at all, out of fear for their own safety. I'm pedaling along when the album I'm listening to ends, and I think to myself, I'm almost there. I don't need to stop and fumble with my phone for a new song. I firmly believe that this decision saved my life. As I'm thinking this, a white van pulls up on my left and stays right inside of my peripheral vision. They revved the engine a few times and seemingly tried to spook me, but something told me not to move. Don't let them know that you know type stuff. So I acted like my music was playing and pedaled just a little bit faster. Up ahead of me was a brick wall to my left and a tall tree over it before an alley entrance. Suddenly this van punches the gas and they pull up in front of me, stopping right next to the brick wall. I know now that they were trying to corner me, to funnel me right to their back door, putting me in a position where I had to ride between their door and the wall. This all happened in the span of maybe 5 seconds. I honestly didn't feel an ounce of panic. I didn't actively register any fear or sweat or anything. It was like someone much calmer had taken over my body and was like, nope. I remember instantly crossing the street without even thinking about the movements or why I was doing them. As I pedaled up the other side, I realized that this van was the one from before, and now it had a window repair magnet on the side. The magnet itself was too small to look good and had absolutely no contact info on it, just a generic name. I kept rubbernecking, and that's when I see that there was no one in the front seat anymore. but there were movements coming from behind the seats. It was clear to me that the guys were in the back by the door. They had planned to drag me off of my bike, off the street, and do God knows what to me. Once I passed them, they scrambled back into the front seat and pulled off so hard that they burnt rubber. I got to the store safely, but I still hate myself for not taking the license plate number down. Not that it would have done any good. They likely would have switched them out later. I knew that I had almost been kidnapped, or worse, but it wasn't until I told this story to someone from Mexico that I realized these were likely traffickers. The person I shared this story with said that this story sounded all too sadly familiar and happens all the time below the border. Personally, I have no family, and my roommates are just roommates. I would have been gone for about a week before anyone decided that something was wrong. And even then, they would have just known that I left on my bike and vanished. I would have been dead or across the border before anyone ever knew I was gone. And that thought is one that still gives me chills at night. I was once telling a friend about a stalker that I had, and she referred me to this forum. This happened years ago, but it still affects me to this day. I apologize in advance for the length, but I feel like I have to tell the entire story. The summer after I graduated high school, I was still living at home. I was up late one night and was packing for a camping trip with my friends. It was unbelievably hot, and I had the window open as I sat and folded clothes. I remember it being around 2 a.m, and the next thing I knew, there was a hand coming through the gap between my window and the windowsill. I instantly screamed, and the hand flew back out. I was stunned, but there was a part of me that wondered if it was my younger brother pranking me. I got up, looked out the window, and just saw the figure of a man standing out in the dark, staring back at me. I ran into my brother's room, and he was there playing video games. I knew then that he had nothing to do with this. We called the police, who came and searched the area. They found nothing, but they warned me and my parents to lock the windows and doors before leaving. We were all still a bit shaken up, and my mom had a feeling that whoever this was, they would come back. Turns out her mother's intuition was correct. She went outside and waited on her back porch. After 20 minutes or so, she saw a man dressed all in black slink into our backyard along the tree line. There wasn't a fence on that side, unfortunately. He hid behind a tree for a few seconds, then ran to another tree and hid there as well, slowly working his way back towards my window. My mom let him get 3 or 4 trees into this dance before she yelled something at him, and he took off running. The police came back out yet again, but found no trace of him. I never opened that window again, not even the curtains for it. My parents installed some motion detecting lights, and that seemed to be the end of it. About 6 months later, my friend and I got an apartment together downtown. We were really excited as this was our first place of our own. The apartment wasn't exactly the best quality, but it was so fun to be living in the city. The downside was that there was only street parking. After a few weeks, my car was broken into. Nothing was taken, but a single rose sat on the passenger seat. It was creepy, but I vowed to be vigilant and safe. I always tried to park close to the entrance, near the lights, but oftentimes it was difficult to get those spots, and I would have to park farther away on some of the darker streets. Things quickly began escalating at this point. My car was broken into almost weekly. Most of the time, a flower was left, which I always threw on the ground. But once, a pair of men's underwear was left, and even more creepily, once a bag of Tootsie Rolls. Innocuous on its face, but those were my favorite candy. This made me wonder if the person knew me personally, and I started to become suspicious of just about everyone. There was a laundry room in the basement of the apartment, and one day I went down to get a load that finished drying. As I started to fold, I realized all of my undergarments were gone. Another week, I had a male friend over from school, and his tires got slashed during the visit. By the time the first letter arrived, I had already started making plans to move elsewhere. The letter described a love for me that had been going on for years. Whoever this was from noted things that proved he had been watching me closely. I was able to arrange for another friend to take over my lease, and I moved in with another friend on the other side of town. It was a secured building and had an underground parking garage that was only accessible to tenants. I felt much more secure, and the extra money spent was well worth the peace of mind. Things were quiet for a few months, and then my roommate got a boyfriend. Most of us were wary of Ashley's new boyfriend from the beginning. For one, they met on MySpace after he reached out to her. Another reason was that the new boyfriend, Matt, was extremely good looking. And while Ashley was a wonderful person, she wasn't the type you would typically expect someone like him to date. Ashley was thrilled about it though. She had never had a boyfriend and really felt like he was her Prince Charming. I thought he was weird and creepy from the beginning. Matt was on the quiet side and always seemed to be sporting an uncomfortable, nearly leering smile. It was difficult to carry on any sort of conversation with him because he would always make it weird with some random facts that were completely unrelated to what we were talking about. I had deleted my MySpace when my stalking began, but I created a dummy account to learn more about Matt. It didn't look like he really knew any of his friends in real life. There were only pictures of himself, and the rest of the information listed was vague. My friends and I gently tried to discourage Ashley from seeing Matt. He technically hadn't done anything wrong, but he was just so damn strange. She would immediately get defensive and would shut the conversation down. Matt started to spend more and more time at the apartment, and I found myself making any excuse that I could to avoid coming home. One day, I came home from work and found Matt on my couch, alone, drinking a beer. Ashley had been called into work, and she told him that he could just hang out. I was furious because I didn't want to spend any time with him, so I grabbed a beer of my own, along with a snack, and headed off to my room before shutting the door. About 30 minutes or so later, he knocked on my door and suggested we watch some TV and try to get to know each other a little bit better because we both loved Ashley. I didn't want to, but decided that maybe I needed to give it a try. He put on a movie, and I tried to just focus on the movie because I didn't really want to talk to him. At one point, I glanced over to Matt, and he was staring at me with that same familiar smile on his face. I snapped a "what" at him, and he just continued smiling and saying, "I just can't believe it." "Believe what?" I asked. He said nothing and went back to watching the movie, still smiling. I had no idea what he was talking about, but the interaction itself had every hair on my body standing straight up. That's when I excused myself and locked the door to my room. Another month or so went on, and I had managed to avoid being home for much anything beyond sleep and showering. Matt practically lived there now, and had even brought a bunch of his things into Ashley's room. I really didn't want to move again, but was beginning to look for other options. On their 6-month anniversary, I saw a huge bouquet of flowers on the table and an already open card propped up next to it. I rolled my eyes and was about to leave when I decided to see what the weirdo wrote to her. When I opened the card, my heart started beating through my chest. Without even reading the words that he wrote, I was shaking. The handwriting was exactly the same as the letter that my stalker had sent. I had kept them as evidence and dug them out of my desk for comparison. The handwriting was unique, yet identical. This proved to me that Matt was the stalker. I called the police first. As they were on the way, I called Ashley and asked her to come home. She was at work but said she would be there when she could. I was terrified to tell her because I knew she would be shattered. The police took a statement from me and actually went to Ashley's work to get more information from her, and they ended up breaking the news. Apparently, Ashley called Matt and left a furious message, even though the cops told her not to say a thing. And then he completely disappeared after that. There was no Matt or anyone matching his resemblance at the place that he said he worked. Ashley had never been to his apartment because he said he had been staying with friends while trying to save money for a trip to Europe. His family lived out of state, and she had never met a friend of his because he said they had a falling out due to the fact that he was choosing to spend so much time with Ashley. It was all lies, and in the end, she was dating a stranger. we don't even know if Matt was his real name. The cherry on top of this whole thing was when we went through Matt's things. He had left everything when he disappeared, and Ashley and I decided to go through it. There was a duffel bag that was full of gym clothes, but in one of the compartments, there were about 10 pictures of me. All were taken from far away, with the exception of one of me sleeping. The sheets on my bed were current, so I know it had to have been in this current apartment before I started locking my bedroom door at night. A few of the pictures dated back to before the incident at my parents' house, which all but confirmed that that was him as well. 2 pairs of my missing underwear were there, and I shudder to think of what he did with the rest. A Starbucks lid with my red lipstick marks, a necklace that I hadn't even noticed was missing, along with a few other random sick souvenirs. The cops never tracked Matt down. I decided to accept an opportunity overseas that I had been considering and got the hell out of there. Unfortunately, Ashley and I quickly drifted apart afterwards. She had a really hard time accepting that her first love was a complete and utter psycho. I think I had some underlying anger directed at her, maybe misplaced, for believing all of his lies and letting him into our lives. I don't know what his endgame was. Would he have tried to hurt me? Or was he simply content with me being in his world? I'll never know. Being stalked changes you, though. Even when I lived across the world, I'd find myself looking over my shoulder everywhere I went. I still have no social media accounts attached to my real name. I'm now married with children, and I know that this man moved on to torment some other poor woman. But every time I visit my hometown, I'm tense, and I do my best to keep a low profile. Part of me will always have this feeling, somewhere between wonder and worry, if Matt will ever resurface again. I'm going to dive into a story from my past. I was 14 years old, and at this time in my life, I was deep into rebellion. Against my parents, against teachers, against anyone who tried to tell me what to do. A year earlier, I'd been caught with weed at school, and eventually arrested for marijuana possession, which meant court-ordered NA meetings and counseling. Looking back, I was just a kid going through a rough patch, but at the time, I thought I was untouchable. For these meetings, my mom would drop me off once a week for my NA group, which met from 8 to 10 p.m. in a rather sketchy part of town. She didn't realize it back then, but the building was surrounded by halfway houses. The one we met in was just one of many on that block, actually. The guys in my NA group were incredible. Most of them had lived through absolute hell and were clawing their way back out. They didn't try to talk down to me. They listened. They gave me advice that stuck with me for years afterward. They were tough, but they were kind too, and they treated me like someone worth looking out for. What I didn't realize at the time was that one night, they'd end up protecting me from something that could have gone very, very wrong. Because the meeting house sat on a one-way street with no parking, my mom's routine was to leave the car at a gas station about 2.5 blocks away. She'd wait there, and I'd walk over after the meeting. Any other time, it was no big deal. But one night, that simple walk almost changed everything. The meeting let out, and I started heading down the street toward the gas station. It was summer, but the sun had already set, and it was late enough that the whole block was dim, lit up only by a few scattered street lamps. When I reached the last house on the block, just before I was supposed to turn left, that's when I noticed 5 or 6 guys sitting out on the porch of that final house. I noticed one of them had a small mirror balanced on his lap. And even as a 14-year-old youth, that was the telltale sign of somebody using coke. Once they spotted me, they called out to me, asked me my name and where I was going. I ignored them as best as I could and just tried to pick up my pace. But that's when, in unison, they all stood up. They started moving towards me, still calling out questions, and one of them asked me for the time. I don't know what it was about at that moment, but something in my gut screamed run. So I did just that. I didn't think twice. I turned and bolted back down the street towards the meeting house that I had just come from. But those guys came after me. I could hear their footsteps pounding the pavement right behind me, and I knew that I wouldn't be able to outrun them for much longer. The only chance that I thought I had was to hide. I ducked into the nearest driveway, dropped to the ground, and scrambled under a parked truck. My chest was pressed against the dirt with my heart hammering so loud that I thought that would give me away. Once I settled into my hiding spot, I realized just how close they were. I heard one of them yell, "Where the f did she go? Find her." I stayed perfectly still, trying not to even breathe, waiting for the feeling of hands grabbing my ankles and dragging me out from under the truck. I could hear them moving through the yard, kicking through bushes, obviously searching for me. It felt like forever, though it probably wasn't more than a few minutes. Finally, they gave up, convinced that I'd somehow gotten away. I heard them cussing as they headed back towards their porch. I didn't wait, though. Once I felt like they were far enough away, I slid out from under the truck and continued running. I vaulted a fence that separated the yard I was in from the halfway house where my meeting had been. Both my arms and legs were shaking, but I forced myself inside. The group was still hanging around, talking like they always did after meetings. When they saw me sweating, trembling, and trying to get words out, they knew that something was wrong. I told them everything. I don't remember their names anymore, but I'll never forget the way they reacted to this. The joking and casual conversation stopped instantly. They surrounded me, calmed my nerves, and told me that I was safe. And then several of them stood up with this quiet, deadly serious look in their eyes. I don't know what they did when they left, and honestly, I probably don't want to. But I know that they weren't going to let what happened slide. The ones who stayed behind made sure I wasn't alone. They walked me the rest of the way to the gas station, surrounding me like a protective wall. When we got there, my mom was already waiting, anxious because I was late. We told her what had happened, and she drove us straight to the police station to make a report. Like most stories you'll hear here, we never heard back about whether anything came of it. No arrests or follow-ups, but in my heart, I'm certain my NA guys made sure those men thought twice about trying anything like that again. I didn't realize it at the time, but part of the reason I mentioned those guys from my NA group is because they weren't just fellow attendees. They became my guardians that night. They didn't just give me advice. They gave me safety when I needed it the most. And without them, I don't know how that night would have ended. I still think about it sometimes, especially how close I came to being pulled out from under that truck. I don't think I've ever been that scared before or since in my life. And as reckless and rebellious as I was back then, that moment sobered me in a way that nothing else could have. I wish I remembered those guys' names. I wish I could thank them all now. But all I can do is hold on to the memory of how they protected me, and how for once in my teenage chaos, I realized there were people who genuinely cared whether I made it home safe or not. This message will likely never make it to them, but I still want to say thank you nonetheless. This all happened within the last few weeks, and I'm still trying to process all of the events that brought me to where I am now. My sister-in-law has been a heroin junkie for years. She started out on pills, but when that got too expensive and harder to come by, she moved on to heroin. I've never liked her. I've always thought of her as selfish and rotten, but I don't think I really understood the depths of how sick she was until very recently. It all started about 3 weeks ago. I had stopped by my mother-in-law's house with my 4-year-old son. He adores his grandmother, Gammy to him, and we had a few minutes to spare that day, so I thought it would be nice to pop in and let them visit. When we got there, Gammy was on the phone with her daughter, my sister-in-law. She sounded cheerful and excited, and when she saw us come in, she happily announced that little Jimmy was here to see her. Notably, she didn't mention that I was with him, which at the time didn't strike me as strange, but looking back, it bothers me. She finished her call, and we settled in for the visit. About half an hour later, I excused myself to use the restroom. While I was taking care of my business, I could tell someone else had arrived at the house. My sister-in-law's voice carried easily throughout it, and I realized that she was the one that had walked through the door. I figured that it wasn't a big deal. Even though I don't like the woman, I'd just say hello and then we'd head out. But when I walked into the kitchen, something was off. My son wasn't there with his grandmother like he was supposed to be. I asked where he was, and that's when she said that her daughter had taken him outside to play. That sounded odd, and when I glanced around, I noticed his little shoes still tucked under the table. My annoyance spiked. Why would anyone let a 4-year-old go running around outside barefoot? I snatched up his shoes and stomped off towards the front door, already irritated. But the moment I stepped outside, my blood ran cold. Across the yard, I saw my sister-in-law lifting my son into the cab of a pickup truck. Behind the wheel sat a man that I didn't recognize. A guy with stringy, dirty hair and this sickly, hollowed-out look. Likely one of her drug buddies. He had the kind of face that you see on the news when they're talking about drug busts or meth labs, and every instinct in my body screamed danger. I didn't hesitate. I sprinted right across the lawn, grabbed my sister-in-law by her shoulders, and shoved her out of the way. I pulled my son out of that truck with all the strength I had. Immediately, she launched into excuses. She whined that they were just taking him out for ice cream, and asked why I had to be such a bitch about it. My heart was pounding. My hands were shaking, but I managed to tell her flat out my son was not going anywhere with her, especially not with some junky friend of hers in the driver's seat of a vehicle that didn't even have a car seat. No, that wasn't going to fly. She cursed at me, hurled a few choice names, and then stormed off with her friend. I stood there holding my son, trying to figure out just how close he had come to being driven off by two people that I would never trust with a child. You'd think that family would rally around me after something like that. You think they'd be grateful that I stopped her, but instead, my mother-in-law and even my husband gave me grief for being mean to her. They couldn't believe that I would treat her such a way while she was in a fragile state. As if that somehow justified trying to take my child. I felt like I was losing my mind, and the familial gaslighting didn't help one bit. Well, 2 weeks later, everything starts to come crashing down. My husband got a frantic call from his mom. His sister was in jail, again, and she needed money for bail. My husband, being the enabler that he is, rushed to do what he always did in this situation, bail her out. But this time, her bail was set so high that it wasn't affordable for us. And over the next few days, he started to learn the extent of what she did that put her in jail. It turned out that my sister-in-law and her same junkie friend had pulled something horrifying. They had borrowed, their words, the young daughter of an old friend of theirs, supposedly to take her out for ice cream. But instead of heading to the local Dairy Queen, they took her to a rundown motel. There, they left her with a man in exchange for several $100s. Yeah, you heard it. They essentially traded a child to a stranger for drug money. What they didn't know was that the man inside that motel room wasn't just some creep. He was actually an undercover officer who had originally been working a sting operation to catch heroin dealers at a seedy bar that my sister-in-law went to often. Somehow, she had managed to escalate the situation to something far darker, offering up a child instead of just drugs. The officer let her follow through with it long enough to make the case, and that's when the hammer dropped. As they walked out of that motel room and back to their truck, flush with the cash they'd just scored, they were surrounded by police with guns drawn. That little girl was rescued. My sister-in-law and her friend were arrested on the spot. When I heard the details, I felt sick to my stomach. I couldn't stop thinking about what might have happened to my son that day if I had been even a minute slower. The thought of it all almost brings tears to my eyes when I think about it now. Now she's in jail, exactly where she belongs. And I hope the sentencing judge shows her no mercy. Because if there's any justice in this world, she'll never have the chance to hurt another child again. This happened almost 20 years ago, back in 2006, the best I can put it together. I couldn't have been older than 4 at the time, yet even now, I can still remember pieces of it. The way it felt, the fear that crept in before I even really knew what fear was. It was an early summer morning. The sun was already up, but the streets in my hometown were empty and quiet in a way that small towns sometimes are. My mom decided to take me and my little sister, who was just 1 year old at the time, out for a short walk. She had some garbage to drop off at the station, and she thought it would be an easy morning errand. My sister was in her stroller, and I tagged along right beside them. The garbage station, which I'm realizing now may be an uncommon term for some of my American brethren. I think you guys call it a dump. But where I'm from, these are much more localized and far smaller. This station wasn't in the middle of town. It sat on the edge of a residential area close to our forest. And if you know anything about Sweden's forests, you know how deep and endless they can feel. The station was tucked away, quiet, and shaded by trees. Even in broad daylight, it wasn't exactly the kind of place that you wanted to linger. It had this kind of feel about it. Being 4 years old, I don't remember the incident in full detail. My memories are more like fragments. A piece here, a flash there. But my mom, she remembers everything. When she talks about it, I can piece together her version of events with the faint memories that I still carry. She said that we were just walking up to the garbage station when she first felt it. That strange prickling sensation on the back of your neck. That feel that you get when somebody's watching you. I remember being creeped out too, though at that age, I couldn't have told you why. I think maybe I was picking up on her nerves. Kids can sense when their parents are afraid, even if nothing's been said. But here's the moment where my memory picks up. My mom stopped walking, turned to me, and said in the sternest voice I'd ever heard from her, word for word, "Hold onto the stroller as hard as you can, and don't let go, no matter what." If I wasn't feeling it already, these words scared me. I can still hear them, replaying in my head whenever I think about it. At the time, I didn't understand what she was afraid of, but I understood enough that something was wrong. Even at 4 years old, I knew my mother wasn't just being strict. She was terrified. Everything after this particular moment gets a little hazy for me, but I can lean on what my mom later told me. There was a truck parked not far from where we stood. There was a man sitting inside. There's nothing unusual about that, right? I mean, trucks pull over to the side of the road all the time, whether it's for rest or planning out their next stop. But this guy wasn't just some driver resting. He was staring at us. According to my mom, once she realized what he was doing, he never looked away. My mom described the way his eyes were fixed on us, moving over her, over the stroller, over me. This guy wasn't trying to hide it. His eyes were following every movement of ours, as though he was sizing us up. Then she says that he smiled at her. I know some places in the world, you smile at strangers to be polite, sort of something you do in passing. We don't do that so much here in Europe, but I've been places where it's common. This was not that. My mom called it a dead smile, the kind that makes your stomach turn because there's no warmth behind it. He licked his lips too, in this slow, deliberate way that I'm sure was designed to make her skin crawl. Putting together this puzzle, I realized that that's the moment that she told me to hold on to the stroller. I know she didn't want to frighten me, but she wanted me anchored to my sister, just in case anybody had to act quickly. My mom is a small woman, barely over 5 feet tall and well under 100 pounds. She knew that if this man decided to get out of the truck, she wouldn't stand a chance in a fight. She had me and an infant to protect, and the odds just weren't in her favor. She later admitted to me that what ran through her head in that moment was the fear of being overpowered, knocked out, and having us taken from her. So she made a decision. We didn't throw garbage out that day. We turned around and left as quickly as a mom with a stroller and a 4-year-old could manage. She said that her nerves were shot the entire walk home, expecting at any moment to hear the truck door slam and footsteps following. But those sounds never came, and we made it back to our house without incident. We didn't talk much about this growing up. Certainly not through the rest of my childhood. For me, it became one of those frightening memories that I didn't really fully understand. It was a weird thing that happened once, filed away in the back of my head, but every time I passed that garbage station in the years that followed, I felt weird. I'd get this knot in my stomach, and I'd have this veil of dread over me for hours after. Fast forward a couple of years, I think it's 2008 at this point. I remember seeing on TV for a week straight news reports about this 10-year-old girl named Ingla who had gone missing. And soon after, even worse news came out. This little girl had been abducted and killed. There are a lot of other details in there that I just can't get into. The man responsible for this was named Anders Eklund. He was a truck driver, and while he wasn't exactly known at the time of his arrest, he would soon become known as one of Sweden's most infamous murderers. I don't have a list in my head of all of his crimes, but I know that he was tied to the assault and murder of another woman named Pernilla, as well as being suspected in the disappearance of another little girl, one who's still missing to this day. My mom told me that when she saw his face in the paper for the first time, her stomach dropped. She said she knew instantly that it was him, the man from the truck that morning. She said that it was the coldness of his eyes on the paper that brought the memory of his stare rushing back to her. Realizing that that was the man that we had crossed paths with, it was almost too much for my mom to process. My mom, me, and my baby sister, we had all been just a few yards away from him, alone, in a secluded spot with no one else around. It's chilling to think just how easily our lives could have been different if my mom had hesitated, if she hadn't trusted her instincts, or even had us linger for a minute longer. Now, when she does happen to talk about it, she always says the same thing, that morning, we came face to face with pure evil, and by some stroke of luck, we got to walk away. In the years since, I've often thought about what might have happened. If we would have gotten closer, would he have gotten out of the truck? Would he have followed us if we hadn't have left so quickly? Was his stare that day because we fit his MO? And we're basically walking right to his front door. I don't know, and maybe it's just better that way. I do know this, though. My mom's memory of his stare, and knowing just who he turned out to be, this is something that likely won't ever leave me. So back in February, there was a man that looked homeless walking up and down my street. My husband and I were outside working in the yard, so while we noticed the guy, we didn't make a big deal of it. The next day, though, he shows back up. This man walks up my driveway and camps on my porch. When we asked him what he thought he was doing, he said that he was going to fix this place up real nice, get himself a dog and some flowers in the front. We asked him to leave, to which he answered, "No, I live here now. I have the papers giving me permission to be here." He then handed us a change of address form from the state housing authority, where he had changed his mailing address to mine. Mind you, this wasn't permission to live at my home, but letting them know to send his mail there. I should point out now that I don't know this guy. I've never met him. Neither has my husband. We asked him to leave again, or we'd call the cops after getting a picture of the form. I spent all day on the phone with the state housing agency trying to figure out what the hell, but they had no answers. A week goes by and we don't hear from the man. I figure that's that. But then one day I walk out to check my mail and he's waiting at the mailbox. He opens it up every few minutes, but the mail hasn't come yet. He tells me that I need to leave him alone, that what he's doing there doesn't concern me, that he doesn't want to talk to me and he's just waiting for his check before he goes home, of course, pointing up at my house. I remind him he doesn't live there, and I start dialing the cops. He takes off down the street, swearing at me the whole way. The cops ask me if he's still on the property. When I say no, they say call back when he is, and that's when they'll come out. I also put a hold on my mail that day because I don't know if he was stealing it. A few weeks go by, and strange things are now happening outside my house. My trash cans get taken to the street and brought back. My weeds get pulled. My lawn furniture is rearranged, but I haven't seen the guy once. The cops offer to add more patrols, but unless they catch him on the property, there's not much they can do. They start to act like I'm crazy because I'm the one calling them every day. At one point, the officer that came out after I found threatening notes taped to the front door asked me if I could prove that this person doesn't live there because, quote, this sounds like a domestic dispute, and we don't handle those. Again, I start to feel like I'm the crazy one. Finally, after about a month of this, my husband and I come home from a late dinner out with friends. We walk into the house, and the first smell that I get is shampoo. That's when we hear the shower. Then we hear the sounds of someone talking. We turn right around and walk back out the door. We get in the car and park it at the end of the street. Then we call the cops and watch the front door. The cops come. They have megaphones and they keep yelling for this man to come out of the house with his hands up. No response though, so they charge the front door and drag him out of the shower. There's a struggle and he starts to fight them. He can't believe that he's being treated this way in his own home. How dare they? We can hear him yelling from our vantage point at the end of the block. He won't come willingly, so the cops tase him in my front hallway. He's finally compliant at that point. They grab my husband's shoes from next to the door, tell him to put them on, and they march him out to the waiting police car. After filling out all the reports, we're allowed to go back in the house. This man had smashed out all of our windows, so there was glass everywhere. He ate the leftover chicken parm from the fridge. In my bedroom, my bed is messed up. He had slept in it, among doing other things. My clothing is all over the floor because he had emptied my dresser to put his things in. We had just put our dog down a few months back, and the urn was sitting on the table. He broke it open and spread the ashes all over my bedroom and bathroom, which might be why he was taking a shower in the first place. He used an entire bottle of $90 skin serum and almost the whole bottle of shampoo. But he folded all my towels he had taken into the bathroom with him nicely and hung them on the rack. I thank God that he didn't hurt my cats. This man is currently sitting in jail on 3 charges: breaking and entering, assaulting an officer from when he fought the cops, and destruction of property. His trial is next week. I've been in touch with the DA and the arresting officer, both of whom have spoken with him. He's pissed that he's sitting in jail, and he keeps telling them to let him out because no one is there to watch his house, and he doesn't want it to get broken into. I'm currently still getting his mail. When I was 13, my parents sent me to an all-girls fitness camp to work on becoming the best version of me possible. Well, I'm going to be honest here, it was a fat camp, and it was as horrible as you can imagine. Bad food, all-day exercise, and god-awful counselors. The camp took place on a college campus, where they had us sleeping in dorms of 2 girls per room. But I had high hopes that it wouldn't be a complete waste of a summer, as my roommate seemed like a pretty cool chick. Let's call her Mary. We had similar interests and the same style. It seemed like a perfect match. We would chat late into the evening planning our escape from the camp, bemoaning having to give up our cell phones, though I secretly had managed to sneak mine in, and talking about our families and how much they sucked for sending us here. To be honest, I was surprised that she was even at the camp. She was pretty fit, and her parents had signed her up for the entire summer versus mine only sending me for 2 weeks. Well, only after 2 days of being in this place, I was pulled aside by another girl who I had become close friends with. She warned me that Mary had a lot of issues, and the reason that she had been sleeping in a single dorm before I had gotten there was because no one else wanted a room with her. Well, I brushed it off, thinking that this was just rumors and other girls being mean. But that day at lunch, Mary seemed rather mad at me, and for the life of me, I couldn't figure out why. So when I got a chance, I asked her what was up. She ranted at me about how everyone was so mean, and was I going to leave too? She went on to explain how this one girl she was rooming with switched rooms because she made friends with this popular girl, and that she made up lies to be popular herself. And silly me, I believed her. We continued hanging out, and only now do I realize that she was keeping me from hanging out with anyone else. Near the end of my first week, the camp took us on a long walk over to the local pool. It was a big deal as it was super hot out, and this was only a once-a-week activity. Mary and I were super excited to go. When we got there, we quickly claimed some chairs and left our stuff there. Mary had been at the camp for several months, so she didn't have to pass some stupid "can you swim" test. One that I assume is mandatory in most camp settings, so we were separated for about 20 minutes. After I passed with flying colors, thank you swim team, I jumped into the pool and started floating around. I heard her calling my name and saw her waving me over to the deep end of the pool. I swam over and asked her what was up, and she said that she wanted to show me something. Before I could even agree, her hands were around my neck, and she's shoving me underwater. Now, I'm a good swimmer, and I'm pretty capable of holding my breath for a long time, but never in my life had anything like this happen to me, and I panicked, opening up my mouth to scream. But before my mind even had a chance to connect the dots of what was happening, I had kicked my legs up and shoved her back as I made a desperate move for my escape. Somehow I managed to swim away and pull myself out of the pool. As I caught my breath and began to process what had happened, I looked back at her and she was just staring at me, not having moved from the spot that she was in at the deep end. I quickly grabbed up my stuff and ran into the bathroom to call my mom. I was in tears as I explained what had happened, and it was obvious that she didn't believe me. I stayed in that bathroom until we left to go back to camp. I didn't leave the counselor's side the entire walk back. When we arrived back at the camp, I was pulled aside by one of the women in charge. She very rudely demanded that I gave her my cell phone. I, of course, denied having one and asked why she thought that I did. That's when she told me that my parents had called asking about some assault that had happened, and they told her that I had called. Quickly, I excused it by saying that I borrowed a phone from some lady at the pool, and thankfully she bought it. They told me that I would be moved to a new room the next day, but it was too late in the afternoon for them to coordinate a move now, so I had to spend one final night with Mary. Furiously, I begged them to please let me sleep on the floor of another girl's room, but they insisted that I was just being dramatic. As soon as I was left alone again, I raced to the closest bathroom and called my mom. I guess I was just looking for comfort because my parents had made it abundantly clear that they weren't coming to get me. Over the next 24 hours, I learned the truth about Mary. I wasn't her second roommate, her third, fourth, or even fifth. I was the sixth girl to stay in a room with her this summer. 3 of her roommates had left camp early, and the other 2 had switched rooms at their first opportunity. All 5 other girls had made allegations of violence against Mary, but the camp refused to do anything, insisting that she was just a troubled girl who wanted to make friends. Or as they told my parents, well, she has had some issues in the past. That night, I didn't sleep a wink, and neither did Mary. She sat up in her bed staring at me all damn night. I could feel her watching me, and I was terrified. I had my phone clutched in my hand with 911 dialed up and ready to call at any moment. I practically cried tears of joy when the sun came up. That day, I was moved to a new room in a different building, and somehow, during the move, I managed to break my foot in the process. So my parents had to drive up anyway, and they took me home with a cast on my foot to commemorate my time there. Even as an adult now, this experience has stuck with me, and I still have issues dating back to it. While living in my own college dorms, I had to make special accommodations because the thought of having a roommate sent my anxiety spiraling. Making friends doesn't come as easily anymore. And I can't imagine sending my daughter into a situation like this. While I know my camp experience isn't indicative of others, I know camps are supposed to be fun, but fun wasn't what I got out of mine. I went to camp, and all I got was trauma. I'm a woman in my late 20s. I live alone, and this story takes place back in the summer of 2020. I had just moved out of my parents' place and into my own apartment about a year before, and due to my own private nature, I didn't really know a lot of my neighbors. I've never been huge on small talk or getting to know people off the rip, so it was just easier for me to do my own thing. Well, that summer, I started noticing a guy who walked his dog in the grassy area behind my block of apartments. His dog was super sweet, and my indoor cat would play at the glass door whenever the dog was outside. One day, the dog ran up to my porch to say hi, and that's how I first met my neighbor. We'll call him Mark. Mark seemed friendly, and because I was out smoking a lot back then, and he let his dog out a lot, we started talking after work most evenings. For a couple of weeks, we chatted for an hour or so at a time. I gave him my number, and things were cool at first. But pretty quickly, that tone shifted. He made it obvious he wanted something more than friendship. I told him straight up I wasn't interested in that, but that didn't stop his pushing. He kept trying to get me to come into his house, and when that didn't work, he started showing up at my door uninvited. At that point, I used COVID as an excuse to stay distant, but he didn't stop. While all that attention wasn't exactly welcomed, it didn't feel malicious at this point. But all my alarms started sounding loud and clear one night. This evening, he came out while I was smoking. He was carrying a bottle of wine and 2 glasses in his hands. He insisted that I just had to try this, that it was too delicious for him to keep to himself. Well, right away, I noticed that the seal on the bottle, a screw cap, was already broken, and the bottle looked to be filled to the brim, which was odd again, because wine bottles normally don't come filled to the top. He poured both glasses and told me to take a drink. I'm looking at this situation with suspicion, but I didn't want to accuse him of anything directly, so I faked a sip. We spoke for a few minutes, and he kept insisting that I drink more while his own glass sat untouched. Again, something noteworthy. At some point, he knocked his glass over and spilled the wine into the grass. He didn't seem particularly worried about the spill, but I told him no worries nonetheless, asked him to pour another and to continue drinking with me. Well, he poured, but he never took a drink. Then, shortly thereafter, he spilled that one too. At that point, I'd had enough. The pattern was too strange and the red flags were loud. I told him that it made me uncomfortable that he kept pressing me to drink while he never drank himself. He said he was just clumsy, that he didn't drink much, but casually dropped that he'd seen me with friends taking shots before. Okay, weird to a whole nother level, because that meant he'd been watching me, and that was creepy. I asked him, why would I drink this if you're not going to drink any yourself? That's weird. As a means to appease me, he said, No, I'll drink with you. Finally, he actually took a sip from his glass, and I, directly in front of him, dumped my glass into the grass before excusing myself to go back inside. I closed my door, locked it, flipped off the porch light, and went on with my night. Well, a few evenings later, Mark came back outside while I was smoking again and started berating me. He demanded to know why I wouldn't date him, or at the very least, sleep with him, getting both loud and aggressive. He then launched into a separate rant about an ex and her dog. That's right, her dog. The one that he's out walking around using as a means to talk to me. I think that he could see the gears churning in my head, and that's when he started bragging about how he used to abuse the out of that dog, saying he wouldn't feed it or water it, and that he had kicked it hard on multiple occasions. This made me think back to any time I saw him with the dog, walking the dog, playing ball with the dog. The dog always seemed a bit skittish and clearly flinched whenever Mark would raise a hand, obviously like it was scared of him. Hearing him talk about hurting an animal, one that was still under his roof, was absolutely horrifying to me. In the middle of his tirade, when he finally took a breath, I cut him off and told him I needed to go and he probably should too. The rest of that night, and for days on end, Mark would blow up my phone with nonsense messages whenever he was outside. Strings of "hey" or just random letters. Short texts saying that he saw me walk by or knew that I was home because he saw my car in the lot. He'd leave his dog toys on my porch. There were even afternoons and evenings where I caught Mark standing in the paddock behind my apartment for hours on end, sometimes in the rain or cold, probably hoping I'd come out smoking. But the joke was on him because whenever I saw him out there, I would just go out front for my smokes. Now, it's worth explaining the layout of my apartment complex. This was a big complex. It basically covered the entire city block that it stood on. Mark's unit was about half a block away from mine. He didn't live close enough to me to see when I was outside on my porch, to see my windows, or even see my car in the lot. He'd been picking and choosing places to walk his dog where he could run into me. That, plus the watching and the wine, made me feel like I was being stalked. I thought that maybe some of his behavior could be blamed on language or cultural differences. English wasn't his first language, and he originated from a different country. So I tried to give him the benefit of the doubt where I could. But all these elements together, it was just too much. My final interaction with Mark was when he texted me a few nights after he had shouted at me and admitted that he was an animal abuser. He asked me what he had done wrong and if I felt disrespected. I never replied. I thought about writing back with the brutal truth about just how twisted and weird he was, but I didn't want to give him any ideas about how to fix himself for another attempt. So I guess therein lies the moral. Stay safe out there. Don't accept drinks from people if the seal is broken, and if someone starts being a bit too eager for you to drink while refusing to drink themselves, I think it's clear that it's time to get out. I have no doubt that he was trying something with that wine, and I still get a pit in my stomach when I think about how easily this could have gone differently. Trust your gut. I'm a 35-year-old doctor. Before the pandemic hit, my life was pretty simple. Long shifts at the hospital and hours in the gym. That's about it. But when COVID hit, just about everything in my world changed. It was an earthquake for those of us on the front lines. I watched colleagues get sick and, in some unfortunate cases, die. My mentor, my best friend from residency, the canteen woman who I never knew the name of until she passed, the one who always gave me a smile when I was exhausted. People I knew and cared about were gone in months. That kind of loss, paired with the impossibly long days and the constant fear of contaminating my own family, began to bury me. After a couple of months on coronavirus duty, the stress started to show. I began making small mistakes in sanitization, ones that I would never have made before. I started noticing my hands shaking after a long shift. My seniors saw how thin and pale I'd become and agreed to move me out of the COVID wards temporarily. There was no spare staff, and what she could offer was a rotation in the emergency room, mixed with some routine rounds. I accepted it. I knew that I needed to get back to a place where I could think. Well, not long after that, we had a high-profile trauma case come in. This was a 24-year-old woman who happened to be the mayor of my town's only daughter. She had a fractured arm, a deep shoulder wound with glass fragments that had missed major vessels by only millimeters. It was a complicated and messy case that took hours to close and wash out the wound. Over the next week, I was tasked with checking on her progress. She was recovering and friendly. Hospital rules were strict back then. Visitors weren't allowed due to the pandemic, so she was understandably lonely and wanted someone to talk to. During all of our interactions, I tried to underscore that clear line between doctor and friend as professionally as I could. But her friendliness slid into something else. She began to openly flirt with me. I told her both politely and repeatedly that I wasn't interested and that I had to keep things professional for both her and my sake. I hoped that that would be the end of it, being that I was straightforward with my concern, but that didn't really matter in the end. One day while examining her shoulder, she suddenly yanked down her gown so it exposed her chest. I was stunned. There was no reason to do that. I kept my eyes on her wound and tried to speak calmly, but she insisted that I look closer before reaching out and grabbing me beneath my belt. I pulled myself away from her bedside and went to exit the room. But before I left, I heard her say something to the effect of, "Why don't you come back and show me what you're packing?" Not only did I find this vulgar, but I found it humiliating. It was actually the first time that I felt unsafe at work. I told a peer about this interaction, another young doctor. His reaction was both dismissive and crude. He laughed and suggested that he would take the opportunity if it were him. That response made me feel isolated and ashamed instead of supported. I went back on COVID duty shortly after and tried to put distance between myself and the situation. For a time, I'd hoped that that would be enough. This woman was discharged, and I kept seeing a blur of new patients and ongoing pandemic needs. A week later, she was readmitted, this time with COVID. And because of her father's influence, she was given VIP care. The hospital, already stretched down to 4 doctors because so many were infected or quarantined at the time, shifted resources just to accommodate her. We were seeing people struggle for every breath, oxygen saturations dropping and organs failing, all while management was arguing over private rooms due to a mayor's call. Watching that happen while patients were literally dying on stretchers pushed me closer to the breaking point than I'd ever been before. One day, she was on my rounds list, and while that already made me uncomfortable, I felt like I had some level of protection from her even knowing who I was, due to the fact that we had to wear full PPE. So I walked into her room, gave her a quick hello, and began that day's examination. I'm not sure if it was because she saw my name tag or recognized me through the PPE, but she reached out and grabbed me by my suit, hard enough that her fingernails started digging into the polymer, so much so that I thought it would tear it. She started yelling, saying loud, obscene things. They were rambling, incoherent, and predominantly sexual. Again, I removed myself as quickly as possible. Well, later that day, I reported the incident to management. They just gave me a shrug. Their point of view was practical. This patient was sick, unwell, and vulnerable. Besides, I was a 6'3", well-built man. What harm could a sick young woman do to me? But the implication was clear. I should just ignore this attention or, in some other twisted manner, be grateful for it, and then move on. That response actually crushed me more than the incident itself. It suggested that men are invulnerable to harassment, and that my report was a nuisance compared to the real problems of the hospital. It made me feel like I was a coward for bringing it up, and like a fool for expecting any level of protection at my own workplace. After careful thought, I resigned from that hospital. I transferred to another one in a different state because I knew my mental and physical well-being had to come first. We're years removed, and I still battle with a complicated mix of anger, embarrassment, and guilt. There's this strange stigma. Colleagues have asked me point blank to my face if I was gay because I refused to be intimate with a woman at work. Others have assumed I was weak for not responding differently. Those remarks sting, and they miss the point completely. Harassment can happen to anyone, and it erodes your sense of safety and trust. It affects men too. It's not a sign of sexual orientation or cowardice to refuse inappropriate advances. It's a sign of professional boundaries and self-respect. And the fact that I even have to say that is wild to me. The pandemic took so much from medical staff. We lost mentors and friends, and many of us had to make hard decisions about how to survive both mentally and emotionally. For me, leaving that hospital was about surviving in the long term. It was about finding a place where my limits were respected and where I could keep doing the job that I love without feeling compromised or dismissed. If there's anything I want people to take away from this, it's that burnout and harassment are not exclusive to any one gender. Both can fracture a career. And when a hospital is under stress, dismissive managers, crude colleagues, unchecked patient behavior can all become unbearable. We need systems that protect all staff members and not turn a blind eye to ones who fit a stereotype of toughness. We need to recognize that men are human too, and that asking for help should never be met with a shrug. So, I was telling a coworker this story and she suggested that I share it here. Sorry in advance if I ramble. I tend to remember additional random details every time I tell this story. Back when I was about 17, around 2009, I worked as a courtesy clerk at a grocery store. I bagged groceries and brought in carts. My mom and sister also worked at this store, so the place felt like family. Most of the guys I worked with were protective of me, which honestly was a blessing, because I got hit on by older men constantly. My coworkers would walk me to my car some nights, and there were even a few occasions where my boss followed me home after particularly odd interactions with men. One incident though, this one really stuck with me. It was an insanely hot day, I remember that. I just finished wrangling a mountain of carts and ducked into the little pizzeria corner of the store to cool down, when out of nowhere this man in his late 20s or early 30s came up and handed me his number. I don't remember him saying much, if anything. He just handed me this slip of paper and walked off. Plain and simple, I was too overheated to even react. Well, the next day, a silver minivan pulled up to me while I was outside collecting carts. The first thing I noticed was a set of baby shoes hanging from the rearview mirror. Then I glance over at the man in the driver's seat. Same guy from yesterday. He tried talking to me, and I remember cutting him off and saying, "Dude, I'm 17 and I have a boyfriend." Usually that was enough to scare men away, but this time that didn't work. That night, near closing time, I'm working on a register with my favorite cashier. We have a little downtime between customers when she leans over and whispers that there was someone watching us. I turned, and near the entrance, I happened to see the same guy from the minivan earlier. He's standing by the scratch-off lottery ticket machine in our store, but he's not focused on which ticket he wants. He's looking right at us. At this point, I walk to the other end of the sales floor into the manager's office. I tell my night manager what's going on, and he immediately opens his office door while finishing his nightly duties so he can keep an eye on things. Eventually, minivan guy leaves the store, but he waited just outside the doors. That was a night my manager ended up following me home. That was an odd experience, but for the next few days, things were quiet and I had just about forgotten about it. Well, a few days later, my aunt randomly texted me, which was unusual because I hardly talked to this woman. She sent me a link to a Craigslist post, one that happened to be in the misconnection section. Her question was if it was about me. It absolutely was. I'm going off memory here, but the post said something like, "Saw you working at the grocery store. You were cute. You wore a bow in your hair, suspenders hanging from your shorts, a bunch of wristbands, along with your bright colored hair. Your name tag said Garrett. I'm 40 and would like to meet up." Now, the Garrett part, that really freaked me out, because Garrett wasn't me. That's not even a woman's name as far as I'm aware. My coworkers and I used to switch name tags sometimes, just to mess with customers and see their reactions. So not only was this guy watching me closely enough to describe my entire outfit, but he had also memorized the fake name I just happened to be wearing that day. Once I got to work, I ran to my day manager and showed him the post. To my surprise, he immediately replied to it. 4 words. "Too young for you." After that, things only got weirder. I started seeing that same silver van around, but sometimes I wasn't sure if it was even the same guy. One time I was outside racking carts, and I rushed inside the store after spotting that van. But by the time I was rushing up the produce aisle, that man was already following me down it. There was no way he could have parked that fast and gotten inside. When I called out to a coworker of mine, he turned and bolted before anyone else, besides the security cameras, caught him. After that last interaction, the police ended up getting involved, and they gave me an escort home every night for a week. I was able to transfer to another store in a different town soon thereafter, and I never saw that van or that man again. Being hit on by creepy older men unfortunately never stopped, but that Craigslist post still gives me the willies. I wish I could find it again, but it may be lost to the internet. I just remember how unsettling it was reading it, the way he described me and all. People like that aren't usually doing that for the first time. It makes me wonder how many other young grocery clerks, baristas, or retail workers were targeted by his advances. It scares me to think that if he went through what he did to try to get my attention, what he may have moved on to doing after. There's really no situation where a 40-year-old should be penning misconnection posts about seniors in high school. Period. But part of me thinks that that's far from the most egregious thing that this man is capable of. Update. In 2011, so not long after this happened, the cops in my town busted a sex trafficking ring in the area and arrested around 40 people connected to it. When I saw that in the news, it really made my stomach drop. While there were photos of a lot of the people involved plastered up on the news report, I didn't happen to see one that I recognized. I'll never know if the guy I interacted with was connected to this, but it certainly feels like he could have been. And that just adds to this whole experience. This is a situation that I learned of about 8 months ago, and it's safe to say that it's been on my mind ever since. For background, as a child, I had a severe speech delay. I was completely mute up until a few weeks before kindergarten. I think that this lag caused me to have a speech impediment, which I technically still have to this day, but to a lesser extent. I'm lucky enough that the letters I have trouble with match up with the letters often dropped with certain accents. So to the untrained ear, I sound British or Australian, depending on who you ask. Because of this, I often just confirm their accent's assumption, because it's easier to lie about being British than to explain the speech impediment thing and face any stigma that goes along with it. The only people who know the truth are very close friends and family. But on to the story. I, an 18-year-old female, was dating a girl who was also 18. We're no longer seeing each other, but for reasons unrelated to the story. We were at a social event when we met up with one of her friends. I technically have known this girl since 9th grade, but not well enough to call her my own friend. So we as a group get to talking. Randomly, completely unrelated to the current conversation, friend asks how my mom is doing. I'm caught off guard because that's not usually something you throw into a conversation without knowing said mom. So I ask back, why? Do you know her? Friend goes on to explain that my mom used to be her EA, or an educational aide, and it helped her work out her behavioral issues all throughout elementary and middle school. Now, this is weird because although my mom did work in a school for a very brief time, she was a lunchtime supervisor and only ever worked in one elementary, an elementary school I know that this friend didn't go to. So I asked this girl if she's sure it was my mom because my mom wasn't an EA. Friend confirms because my mom used to talk about me all the time. And when friend was deciding which high school to go to, my mom recommended my high school because that's the school that her daughter went to. Now, within my high school, there were a few people with the same name as me. My name is about as basic white bitch as they come. So I asked friend, are you sure it's me who she was talking about and not one of the other people with my name? She once again confirms that it was definitely me because my mom would tell her details about my life and told her about my time going to speech therapy. Now, hold up. As I said earlier, I'm pretty secretive about the fact that I have a speech impediment. This friend is clearly someone I never told that to. Although I will admit it's not impossible to guess, and the girl I was dating at the time could have let it slip. But I have never, and I mean never, ever, told anyone about going to speech therapy. That's just never a detail I share when telling my life story. It's clear that someone who knows me like family is telling her this stuff. There's no way friend could have accurately guessed so many details about my life. So just to confirm that somehow my real mother doesn't have a double life, I asked this friend what my mom looks like. She responds that she's somewhat short, with curly brown hair. That is not my mother. My mother is tall and blonde. This, though, is exactly what my first speech therapist looked like. She was hired through the school district, and I saw her for about 2 years before she switched off to another school. She also works with a variety of special needs, meaning it's quite likely that she went on to become Friend's educational aide. But all this to say, somewhere out there, this speech therapist is for some reason pretending to be my mother, and to some extent, stalking me, as she would have had to have done research to find out what high school I was going to. Additional bonus story here, one that I remembered only while writing this post. When I was a child, but after I had switched speech therapists, I was in a store with my mother where there was this shiny blue guitar. Me being a child and liking shiny blue things, I really wanted this guitar. My mom clearly said no, as it was expensive and I had shown little interest in playing the guitar besides watching my dad play his bass. I was disappointed, but I understood it. Out of the blue, my first speech therapist shows up and buys the guitar for me. My mom told her that she didn't have to, but my speech therapist insisted on it. At the time, this just seemed like a nice thing that she did, albeit overly generous. But now knowing she's parading around pretending to be my real mom, it definitely paints the situation in a different light. I don't know exactly how to feel about that gift now. There's not much I can do about the situation, as I don't even remember what the speech therapist's name was. So that just kind of leaves me in this realm where all I can do is hope that we never meet again.